We'll call this March 6th meeting of the Regional Plan Committee to order at 6:06 p.m. and take roll call.
Paul Byer.
Here.
Tina Berger.
Here.
Alicia Chi. Alicia make it? Here. Okay. Abel Estrella. Dirk Foreman.
Here.
Thank you, Dirk. Susie Garrettson. Here. Robert Hamilton. He might be out of town. Okay. David Hayward.
Here.
Michelle James.
Here.
Julie Lead. Here. Rick Miller. Is Rick online? Tom Pearson is absent. Walter Phelps. Kim Robinson. I saw her log in. Kim, are you having audio issues or can you unmute and say here? I'll keep an eye out for Kim in the chat because she is present online. The question mark. John Van Landingham. Here. Diane Vosick is absent and Christy Zeller. Allie's absent. Who just tried to log in? Oh, there's Walter.
Hello.
Hi, Walter. I was just calling roll. So Walter Phelps.
I'm here.
Thank you, Walter. Okay, so I did not hear Christy either. So that gets 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We have a quorum.
Indigenous land acknowledgement. What do you want?
City of Flagstaff humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of this area's indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands still inhabited by native descendants, border mountains sacred to indigenous peoples. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place as home.
Thank you, Michelle. And Sarah, you're going to give us an overview of the agenda.
Right. So thanks everyone for reconvening after about 6 months of hiatus for the group. As we discussed in September, we have been reconvened in order to review some of the key responses that staff is considering to the public comments. You got in your packet both the sense-making report and a spreadsheet with the 2,400 comments we received during our highly successful 60-day public review. Elsa and Joe, who's graduated, spent 2 months almost categorizing them all so that you can find them in the sense-making report. It's a huge amount of interesting feedback to be receiving on the plan, but we don't have time in this meeting to go through every single part of every comment and every potential response. So we have narrowed it down to comments that are really critical to how the plan works. So a lot of these comments, we have not written the actual change we're proposing, because to do that, it will change something in one section and then we will have to chase it through the whole document. So before we jump into those big changes, we wanted to get feedback on those from the committee. So what you have tonight is essentially 9 items that are a bigger deal for staff to change, and we want to understand if the way we're doing it is adequately responsive to the comments and the technical issues that we ran into both with the internal and external review, and if it's a good direction for us to be going. There is a friend of mine who's an art professor, and she has this way of describing iterations where if you are doing something and it's not what you wanted, she just calls it work to make work. So it's work you made so you can make the thing you actually want to do. And so some of the things we've looked at given the kind of feedback we've gotten, we kind of looked at them and said, well, maybe this was a great thing. We might have spent a lot of time on it. That time isn't wasted. It's simply a refinement to take it to a different place in the document. And so some of these are bigger deals than others, but we felt they were important to come back to the committee, and that's what we'll spend most of our time on tonight. I'll give you a quick overview, which is agenda item 5 of the timeline, of what we're hoping to do from here, because that has changed a little since we last spoke. Okay, yeah. So you may recognize that Melissa Shaw from the county has been working on the comprehensive plan during the 60-day public review and has convened an advisory group, much like this committee that is helping guide the drafting of the comprehensive plan. We have been meeting and trying to understand how the 2 adoption processes for these documents are going to be organized and pulled together. And after this meeting, you see we're in the March Regional Plan Committee, March 6th meeting. We are working on a survey. So some of the issues tonight that we'll talk about are in a survey that we're drafting, and some of them are different issues that we didn't bring back to the committee. But we are going to go out and do one more round of public engagement that will include a survey and several open houses in April. That then will be sent to a joint retreat of the City Council, Board of Supervisors, and both Planning and Zoning Commissions, which is going to take place during the day on May 2nd, Friday, May 2nd. So that will be video streamed. It will be open to the public to come and comment and hear the conversation. It'll be like a budget retreat. It's a long day. But it'll be something you can review later or review or join if you are able. That will give us June to do final revisions on the document, and then public hearings would start in late July for the city. And then that Planning and Zoning Commission hearings for the comprehensive plan actually will be taking place around the same time. So we're going to have to be really careful with our messaging so people know come to City Council for the regional plan. The comprehensive plan is also being considered at the county. And then the county will, again, adopt after the city has adopted, but we've changed the order a little bit. The county has decided they want to proceed with adoption before the city ballot initiative.
So thinking about, just to add on to that then, if the ballot initiative is in March of 2026, it could get stale by then. So, or not really stale, but just to keep the momentum, if you will, and keep it fresh in people's minds, it goes then to county public hearing process prior to the ballot, then, we have an adopted version that hopefully will match what the city's adopting. If something happens then and it doesn't pass ballot measure, that's another discussion. Then we'll have to be coming back and amending it anyway with both city and county. So
the call for the ballot really has to take place almost 6 months in advance. So it's a very long timeline to get the ballot going. So mid-September is really the cutoff for that March ballot. So if we had wanted to stay on the November ballot, it was the beginning of June, which, given that we're having a May 2nd retreat, just wasn't going to happen. So that's part of why we slipped backwards a little bit. But it's, that time also allowed us to have one more public engagement, to have this midpoint check-in with the committee, and then to maybe figure out a better way to sync up with the comprehensive plan process.
in our comprehensive plan process, it may shift a little bit in terms of it may go out a few months. So yeah, just to keep that in mind as we're working through with our committee. We're about approaching the home stretch, if you will, on their work. But we're also slowing things down a little bit so that they make sure that they have time to review everything. So these dates are not set in stone, if you will. We don't have to call a ballot measure, so we're not quite as committed to having an exact date.
Anyone have questions about the timeline? I don't want it to take up too much of our timeline and conversation, and I want to give Elsa a few minutes to maybe talk about the sense-making report. Any questions on the timeline and how it's shifted? Makes sense. Anybody online? I'm trying to make sure I pay attention to you guys raising hands or unmuting. No? Okay, Elsa, do you want to talk quickly about the sense making report? And we'll get going on topics.
My screens. Okay, so this was included in the packet in the meeting folder and also is available on our website. This is kind of a summary of the comments by theme. And we received almost over 2,000 comments that was combined from the public and from some of the staff testing that we did. And we have them all captured in this graph or in this pie chart by theme. So a lot of the comments had to do, like almost a third had to do with making the plan more clear and understandable and working on graphics and, the phrasing and wording of different parts of the plan. So that's the plan clarity theme. And then there were several themes that we know are very important to people in Flagstaff: the natural resources here, climate action, food systems equity, growth, housing affordability. There were almost 100 comments on the future growth illustration, and then other comments on the land use framework that fall into these other themes. So if you're interested in getting more into the comments, we do have a spreadsheet with the public comments online, and this report breaks down each of these themes in a little bit more detail with some sub themes, so you can see some examples of the types of comments that people submitted. So yeah, we definitely got a lot of comments, and it's exciting to see that so many people their time towards commenting on everything.
What was the number of people that actually commented?
It is hard to get a precise number on it. There were 280 something who commented on Conveo, right? And then we had almost 100 comments come in through other means. And then there were a few dozen meetings worth of comments with interest groups. So it's hard because some of those people might also have commented on Conveo or might, have given individual comments on Conveo, but group comments via an organizational letter. So it's really hard to get a precise person count. It was definitely over 300 or 400. My guess is it was somewhere closer to 400, but it actually could have been more, and it would be really hard for us to tell because also Conveo gave you the option to comment anonymously. So those anonymous comments could all be different people or could be similar people. But I mean, on average, there were 10 comments per page. So pretty extensively commented on. Yeah. Are there any questions online? I'm looking online to see if there are hands up or.
Yeah, anyone who's online, since there's quite a few of you today and not that many people in the room, just unmute yourself and speak up if you have something you want to say.
Hi, this is Nick Wood. I represent Little America. We do have a couple of comments.
Oh, sorry, Nick, that would be part of the public comment period, which is at the end of the meeting.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Any of the committee members, I see Walter and Paul have their hands up. Walter, you have your hand up. You go first.
Okay. Good evening. I was wondering if I'm not really sure how much real estate is owned by the Hopi tribe within the city boundary. Was there any specific feedback from the tribe?
We did not get any comments from Hopi Tribe or Navajo Nation in their real estate or economic development groups. We did get quite a bit of comments about lands owned by those two organizations and about descriptions and material related to Indigenous people in the document. We didn't bring that to the committee. What we did is actually earlier today, we were at the city's Indigenous Commission, which also has representation from the county's IPAC, and they are going to go over those comments this month with us. So,
Good.
but the real estate divisions, no, neither of them got back to us with any comment. We did hear
Thank you.
from the State Land Department, which is a different big landowner organization, and from the Forest Service. Thanks, Walter. Other questions? Anything else to add on the sense-making report, Elsa?
I don't think so.
I think in the first email I sent to the committee with this agenda, I made a point, and I'll remake it now. There are many, many comments about things that we did not put on this agenda because we only have 3 hours. If you have some other set of comments that you saw or noticed, either in the sense-making report or the spreadsheet that we posted online, and you would like to talk to staff about them, we're happy to set up time to do that, to be able to stay on the agenda tonight. If that's agreeable to everyone. Great. And I'm watching for hands online. I don't see any right now. All right. Move on. Yeah.
6.
Yeah. Number 6 is
Is this the
yes. This is the regional plan meeting.
Cool. Sure.
Yeah. Grab a chair. So the first item that's substantive in the document is the regional plan reorganization plan priorities. So we've sent to you all a potential way of reorganizing the goals and policies of the plan underneath the plan priorities. To do this, we had to kind of re-describe some of the priorities a little bit. But then we also had to add a few key priorities, being healthy economy and resilient and sustainable public facilities. But we kept the original 5 otherwise intact, just organized them differently. This is a comment a lot of people made this comment. They said, I want to see how the priorities and the goals and policies go together better. One of the consequences of that is it breaks up some of the topical groupings. So parks and recreation and open space has to be broken into several different groups. We can't have all their goals and policies together because they're related to different priorities in some cases. And then, of course, there are policies that really could be related to all or more than one priority. So we made a best guess on how to organize them in a manner that made sense. And this is kind of our first attempt at that. So 1, we want to know if you'd like us to pursue this further in this direction. And then 2, we would also like to know if you are okay with adding the 2 additional priorities so that we can cover things with this reorganization.
Additional ones, tell us what they were again.
A healthy economy and resilient public services and facilities. So there's a lot of policies that are just about infrastructure, like water services, like, ones about stormwater management. And yes, there's climate action parts of them, and yes, there's natural resources things about them, but they're really about creating that infrastructure in a way that's improved. So we'd add that. We'd also, and that one, we also thought maybe we should move the growth management policies under it. There are also a couple policies that need a very significant rewrite, and I marked those in this outline as well. I don't have those rewrites done to share with you because I need to know if I can do them this way, and that might influence how they get rewritten. So that's the pitch based on kind of an overwhelming set of comments that fell into this category of, if we want the priorities to be powerful, things should be organized by them or show a stronger connection with them.
It doesn't change the goals or the policies. It just puts them in different buckets and reorganizes them. So I don't have a concern about changing the layout and adding those particular headings and moving things around. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other, because again, it doesn't change the goals and policies. That's a later agenda item about the policies and might change.
Yeah, and I had a similar kind of question of clarification. So this is just chapter 3. The other chapters will all stay organized the same. Chapters will be the same.
Yeah, I sort of felt that is my proposal right now. And part of the reason is that I think we spend a lot of time on the background information being organized topically, and the action items are still organized topically. And that really might be helpful to the people who are implementing the plan, right? Is to have it organized that way. It would take more time if I had to also reorganize all those other chapters by the priorities. But it's not, if people felt strongly that organization had to carry through, just have to figure out how to cut and paste and reorganize it better.
I kind of like having it most done in a couple of different ways, right? Because it allows you to sort of access the document at different points and in different ways, depending on what either you're trying to do with it or who the user is. You know, I also like that. I mean, we have the policies are all have that letter code and a number code, right? So we can then kind of cross-reference to which topic section they're in as well.
Yeah, we might rename them or renumber them so that they are maybe organized by the chapter headings or something like that. I don't know how we'll do it.
Yeah, as long as it's just kind of obvious that it's a piece from there. But I agree with everyone else. If you guys have spent way more time with this, so if you think this is the way to go, then
It's hard for me to visualize it, but
it's never going to be.
it makes sense in my head.
Yeah, I will tell you, there is a tendency on the staff side to read my chapter. Like if I work in a division of the city and things are sprinkled throughout this section, that's less comfortable for people who are like, I want to find all the stuff about parks, because that's what I do is I go manage and design parks. This kind of sprinkles it so they have to read more to find that, but not a ton.
You just have an index, right, that references that for folks. Do you have any comments online?
Looking for hands. Committee members? Yeah, and so maybe if I can go through this real slow, also like the ones I think that I'll point out, reorganizing these also means that we need to change quite a few of them. And some of that can just be because they are written so differently than other things under the same priority. So neighborhoods and equity, the way we had originally written it, when you compare it to these other ones, it's kind of written in like they're written in a way that would be harder to comparatively apply. So we have done like an effort on that one. I have gotten a draft of rewriting it where there was a ton of public comments about the wording and what it means. And we need to do a lot of language clarification in there. But then we also probably need to make it match whatever else is under this priority a little more and maybe eliminate some redundancy. So neighborhood and equity, I expect to write significantly, cover all the same topics, but rewrite them differently. And then the other sections where that's the case are development patterns. And that is largely because when we tried to apply our development pattern policies, which currently the first draft was written as by the category. So it said urban neighborhoods and centers, It created redundancy with the land use category guidelines and also some confusing things. So we tried to go back through and find the more universal things that needed to apply broadly to everything and put those under development patterns. As well as saying that, yes, you've got to go look at your land use guidelines as well. And we'll get to that when we talk about implementation guidelines. The other one that is significantly rewritten is the growth management. I think that's the only other one. And really, I'm rewriting that because everyone hated it. 0 people liked the way we wrote those, sorry. We just bombed. So I'm gonna make a new attempt at them. I'll just be frank. And I think it was because we were maybe trying to do too much. It read a little like a kitchen sink policy. Like we tried to figure out how everything worked together and then it just didn't read well, so nobody knew what we meant. So that's okay. We learn by sharing. So committee members, any thoughts, concerns about those 3 rewrites? We're gonna try and stick to the intent, but rewrite them so they will be more functional.
You can split them up.
We're going to split up development patterns and growth management. Growth management is going to get really focused on the growth management public services side, and development patterns will cover some of those other things I think we were trying to find a way to insert into growth management. And maybe that's the if we agree with this reorganization, that's the principle I'm going to go use in revising them.
All right. We don't have any more comments online. We will move on to the next one. That's right with you.
Yeah, I guess I just want to hear that everybody can live with that revision.
Speak now, forever hold your peace.
I can live with it.
Good, thanks, start. Okay, we can move on to implementation guidelines. So, yeah, the part of your packet where we talk about implementation guidelines, the way I would describe this is that there are 2 camps in the document. First camp, and there's many more, but 2 at the extremes of reading the document. One is the TLDR comment. If you don't know that abbreviation, it means too long, didn't read. In fact, one of the comments on the cover said, I haven't read this document, but. So TLDR is real. And we definitely had, after chapter 4, the number of comments on the documents fell significantly. But also there are people who who provided what I called the impatient comments. And they said, well, what about this? And then it said it on the next page. And like, oh yeah, here it is on the next page. So there was something about the way we were writing, especially chapter 1 and other things, that really made people impatient for getting to the point, right? That's part of why I think we made the right decision to get everything into chapter 3 and 4 as much as we could, move things up in the document. So, but people who got to chapters 5 and started looking at the implementation guidelines, they found a lot of duplication. There was a lot of people who read that section and said, but didn't you say that in chapter 3? Or isn't that covered in chapter 3? And so we took a hard look at that. And then there were a lot of people who fell into the opposite end of our reader spectrum, which is more detail, more detail, more detail. They were hoping this would be a 500-page document and that they could use it as their 10-year reference encyclopedia about Flagstaff. So more and more detail, more detail, more detail, and TLDR are 2 of the audiences for the document, if you think of that. And I'm trying to find ways that when we work through the document, we are meeting those needs. But the duplication in implementation guidelines actually became an issue with people reading them and going, but you said it this way in chapter 7, and it said this way in chapter 3, and so which one do I do? And people weighed in and they said, well, I'd like it what you said in chapter 7 better. And so that
people got to pick and choose.
Which means we'll be in this situation where people are picking and choosing which one they want to believe is our policy. So, and then lots of people in staff said, well, this reads more like a policy or this reads more like a guideline. And they were even struggling. So everybody's struggling with this distinction. So I went through all the implementation guidelines and I said, well, how many of these really could be considered duplicative? And it's about 75%. We really could straight cut 75% of the implementation guidelines, and city and county staff would do nothing different over the next 10 years. They would have enough direction to do a lot of the things we called out in more detail. But there are some that it's like, well, there's really nothing else that talks about this. So maybe it needs to go in an action item, or maybe it needs to go in a policy. And we tried to make some guesses, some good guesses, I think, on how we could do that. And that's covered largely in this table. In addition, one of the things we had done to kind of save space in chapter 4 under the land use framework was we left all the parks and recreation guidelines in the parks and recreation chapter, but if we're getting rid of implementation guidelines, those are going to have to move into chapter 4 because parks, recreation, and open space is also a land use category. And then the oddball one is there's really nothing else that sounds like our significant natural resource guidelines. We do have a significant natural resource map in a later chapter, but it feels like maybe those guidelines either have to stay guidelines. They don't really read like a policy. They're about, proximity known faults should be considered in capital planning. That's very guideline-ish and not very policy-ish. It doesn't really tell you the policy about that other than we should be considering it. So I'd like to maybe move those into the land use framework as kind of a side category that talks about resource protection or resource stewardship. And we have those as guidelines that apply anywhere we're dealing with natural resources. They're not category specific, in other words. So that's sort of the proposal. And you've got the details if anybody in your packet. What do you think? This is kind of one of the work to make work ones. Like, we spent a lot of time on this. I don't think that meant it was time wasted. I just think we didn't get the response that it was useful in some ways, and it created problems in others. And so this is just one way to solve it. If it's wrong or we need to head in a different direction, this is the time where I want to hear that from all of you.
Does anyone online have any comments on that?
Walter. Walter has his hand up.
I'm sorry, Sarah, can you go back up, scroll back up just a little bit? Wait, I'm somewhere right there. It's talking about natural faults.
Right there.
Right there, yeah. It says known faults. Does that mean the geological faults?
Yes.
Like, is that what that's talking about, or is it talking about human error?
It does mean geological faults. The place it shows
Okay.
up in the plan has a heading that talks about geological issues, but a good point that we probably will have to make sure that's clear.
Don't
Look at
to
Yeah.
offend the capital planning.
All right.
The faults of those capital engineers.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I think it makes sense. I think it looks like it was a whole lot of work. But it's what editing basically does, just to make it more concise. So without seeing how it's actually going to look, it's hard to say yes, but to me, it looks like it needed to be done.
Tina put a comment in the chat and said she likes it. She felt like we crammed a lot in there. And maybe they'll clean that piece up. Give anybody like heartburn?
I have one.
Heartburn somewhere in here.
No, I take medication every week. So I think it's great that we did it. I also think it's great that we went through the exercise of reviewing every single one of them, and really because then that also allows you to double check the policies, right, against those implementation guidelines. So I think that's fantastic. Then I'm all about simplifying it as much as possible. One of my concerns is that it felt to me like when we were doing the process that the implementation guidelines was a little bit of a dumping ground for the stuff that kind of didn't make the cut. And so, having this kind of the action of effectively dropping or folding in, 75% of them, like you said, but then having the rest of them, the other 25% sort of remaining, and then getting pushed up into kind of equality with other items that I think we all gave like a lot more consideration. Like that makes me a little uncomfortable. I think it makes me the parks and open space. It's hard for me to say. I mean, when I read the parks and open space stuff, it felt like a master plan for like a 5 or 10 year plan for like the open space like department, right? Which it just feels like they should be writing that themselves,
It will.
And then the natural resources guidelines, knowing that we have this process coming up, right, where we're sort of, correct me if I'm wrong here, but the goal is to move into a sort of more citywide resource kind of identification program, and then make our planning decisions based on that, as opposed to it just being, 30%, 50%, whatever it is. If we have that coming up, can't we kind of push the significant natural resources part of it and the real details into that, so that we have more time to really get down into the like science of this? Like I'd like an expert to weigh in on like, do we need to care about faults, right? Like fault lines in Flagstaff. Because I for sure don't think we do, right? Not just because I lived in California. So that's my thought on those two items. It feels like we've created sort of two different classes of policies by having these two different pieces.
So I'll just share what I've learned from talking to staff about the resource protection overlay, which is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like a subset of these.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding is that's going to be addressed to code.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we need to change language in here. We'd have to look at what we wrote. It was written a long time ago, but some of these that are natural resource guidelines are broader, I think, than the resource protection overlay, which is fairly.
Yeah, I agree.
So
Yeah, I do. Actually, I agree with that point. And but some of them feel a lot more specific, and some of them feel much less specific, right? I mean, just looking at optometrist said my eyes were fine, but it doesn't feel like it. Right. So, preserve natural topography and open spaces one, right? It's kind of like, okay, that's relatively sort of open-ended, right? But avoiding compaction, avoid compaction of riparian areas when locating roads, trails, or buildings, like that could be a code, like that could be code that's like detailed enough to be code.
I think some of it, to me, I look at it as like best practices, which I don't know if this stuff is in code. Does anyone know?
Some
Compaction of
parts,
soil and riparian.
some parts of significant natural resource language from the current plan were already in code when we even did the current plan, and some things have not been added to the code. Like, there was that whole petition process. Someone did petition to have some of these things like seeps and springs aren't in the current code, but they wanted them added, or at least moved up in the priority list because they are pretty delicate natural resource and vulnerable one right now.
Here, they might get addressed in code sometime.
Right, and the state statute still requires that we identify significant natural resources. And one of the issues last time was we identified them and people just felt they didn't know what to do with those, other than we could tell you that there was limestone soils on your property that might have rare plants, but nowhere in the development process did we require you to survey for them. So it created a disconnect where you could say, would you mind avoiding that limestone area? If you can't avoid it, we could never enforce that, but we would ask. We'd ask nicely. That's how I'd put it. And sometimes it was. But I have no way of knowing if that preserved any rare plants.
I know, I remember talking to someone, a planner who's since left at the city during COVID, so we were all online, and he was starting to draft those. That would take some of these guidelines and put them into code. I don't know what the status of this now.
Yeah, I think we took a pause when we realized we needed to take such a hard look at the resource protection overlay for fire safety too, and fire protection. So that became, it became a wider conversation. So I think we had started work.
More urgent.
And then there was an urgency issue. And so especially for everybody who's calling tree services right now, they're booked high heaven. And that's pretty, a pretty big thing to try and incorporate, which is what our code administrator for the city has been working on lately. And I believe Tiffany is on, or maybe did not make it tonight. I think she hasn't made it on tonight. So it is possible that.
I'm here.
Oh, you are here. Great. Do you want to speak to this at all?
What exactly would you like me to speak to?
I think my question, Tiffany, would be,
Mhm.
is there an opportunity in projects that you and the department already have coming up to investigate these things in more detail? So we can do it in a kind of, thorough and well thought out way, and not, right now it just feels like we're kind of shoehorning it in at the very end of the process, which doesn't sit right.
I mean, sure, there's always a way to add into code. Right now there's a lot of sort of goals and objectives we're trying to achieve. And while we are looking at resource protection in terms of our forest management guidelines, which were recently adopted, we've also had recommendations or preemptory recommendations through our code analysis project about how resource preservation can impact housing affordability as well as carbon neutrality goals. So that's also very important. I think for me, the end run would be to understand what the committee's expectations are with these implementation strategies. Being that they're not exactly policies, they wouldn't then fall under sort of general plan conformance for a zoning code text amendment, but it'd be really good to understand what the expectation would be in considering these for future zoning code text amendments. And then maybe prioritizing where they fall in the midst of all of the other things we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my response, I don't know why, this is like, look at the ceiling, why continue you up there? I suppose my issue then is that part of it's like, because we didn't put these in here with the policies, right? They were somewhere else. We didn't ask as a committee that they be considered in that way. So it's just, to me, it feels like they're a good set of thoughts, and I think, as you said, Michelle, like potentially best practices that need to be considered, but I don't feel comfortable, saying this is my recommendation. That's why, I'd want more work to be done on it.
Yeah, and
I would offer some edits to those if they're gonna move into the natural resources section, if that's what we're gonna do.
And I think
Some pretty heavy edits.
Yeah, I think they need to be edited if they're gonna be moving up into moving from like the chapter they're in right now, which is resource stewardship and resiliency, to being some kind of natural resource best practices or something in the land use framework. And at one point we talked about calling the implementation guidelines best practices, and the committee didn't like it at that time, but since Michelle said it, I'll bring it back around that maybe that's a different approach, because a best practice is something you do if you're able to, like if you can do them, which is, I think, and Ed had a comment from our stormwater manager that some of these feel very conflicting to him as somebody who's out there working with stormwater based natural resources regularly. And
He's gonna have to deal with, he's gonna have to follow these, right, when he's doing his projects.
right, but some of them can be helpful, like knowing that we care about wildlife corridors has actually been helpful in some cases, because sometimes people come to meetings where we're talking about a project and they go, well, I've seen elk there. So it must be a wildlife corridor, where there's actually a whole different scientific consensus about what constitutes a wildlife corridor. So it can limit where some of those concerns get raised. But it also can feel kind of nebulous if you don't know where all those resources are in your property.
from what I know about the history of where I think most of these came from is I'm not gonna remember the name of the group. It's a group of ecologically trained or minded people who came together for like 20 years.
Conservation Study Forum.
There it is. And I joined it right at the end of kind of its life, because we lost a leader. And my understanding was they were working for like 20 years with the city, and then sometimes with the county as well, to actually get these in as code. So I would hate to see them removed. I think they need to stay there. They're quite good. Thinking from the wildlife side of things, which is the hat I'm putting. And I think if we wanted to change anything, we should talk to that group and make sure that, we're not taking out something that they talked to the city and county about for years.
Yeah, well, Rick Miller, who's on the committee, who's not here tonight, was a longstanding member of that group. So I could follow up with Rick on some of this too. Yeah, I'm a little less concerned about the parks and open space ones, and some of these natural resource ones are about open space, and so maybe they actually will move over. I haven't done a cross-reference of those two things yet, because I needed that, is this the right direction conversation before I could take a next step on that. But if the direction that I'm hearing from a few people at least, and this is definitely important enough that more people need to weigh in on this, is that if we're going to move them up into chapter 4, that they need to be rewritten, and that maybe some of them need to move over to parks and open space. And that we need to have some kind of caveat that says these might not apply to every parcel, or something that helps people know it's not always going to be equally weighted.
I just saw an interesting one as you were flipping through that I hadn't noticed before, but there was something there about excavating or doing work underneath trees. There it is. Avoid excavation below the tree canopy. That's something that I've seen in, speaking of the protection overlay, I've seen that in Oregon's resource protection overlay, which they call something different. So some things could go into other areas.
Yeah, and that one people have pointed out is too specific too. They're like, that feels like that is code, and that definitely shouldn't be there. So the more detail commenters want this to read like code, and the TLDR people are, when you're get to the point. But if it reads like code, then it doesn't really help. It doesn't always help create new code, which feels like a contradiction. But if it reads like code, it can remove flexibility from when we're actually sitting down and trying to negotiate what new code or revised code.
Also, during the
He has her hand up, by the way.
During the planning process, right? Because I mean, when you're coming in for a rezone or for a plan amendment, it's a detailed, intensive process, right? And I mean, I think part of the deal is that you're basically saying like, you know, in this scenario, we need to be able to get into this and be flexible and be able to, you know, make trade-offs as opposed to code when you're saying, you know, okay, you've got this, this is what you can do, and this is what you can't do.
I would guess I'd just say if something is really specific and should be code, let's not lose it. Let's give it to Tiffany or, somewhere so it's not lost.
Yeah, Tiffany
That's
pointed
my
out
point,
that
is it's already in code. So I'm not sure why you need to repeat it here, because we already have that as a code provision.
Okay, good. I didn't know.
is in the county code.
Under basically tree protection. No, we don't have that in county code.
Yeah, it might be in there because the county doesn't have it in their code. And people wanted to see it carried over. I don't remember the exact discussion of that one. I'll have to go back and look at notes. There's only 2,000 comments and 400 meeting minutes to track, so sorry, it's not all in my head this week.
I got comment letter to the committee from Sot Best on some of these, because he was the leader of that group for a long time.
Yeah, maybe I'll go back and look at that meeting too and see where it came from, but I can go back and look at that original meeting, look at our conversation, try and revise it. If you'd like me to reach out to Rick and maybe set up some time with him, since he's got that long history, then I can work on revising it that way too. But I definitely feel like it would be kind of like applicable natural resource language that's applicable to any land use, essentially.
Support talking to Rick.
Any other folks online want to weigh in on the moving up significant natural resource guidelines and parks and open space guidelines and following through on the rest of what's recommended here in the table? We're a little over time.
Well, we saved time on the other end, so
Let's take time on the other ones.
we did already save time, didn't we?
I think we did go faster on the other ones.
So is the resolution to work on a rewrite, but to move them up?
That's what I've heard from this conversation, but I know folks online are listening too, and I want to make sure everyone's had a chance to weigh in. But yeah, that's kind of the proposal in here, is that I'd move them up to chapter 4. Then you would have all the goals and policies in chapter 3, all the guidelines in chapter 4, and then the entire chapter 5 through 12 would be the background information and action items only.
But they'd be rewritten or some of them struck.
Yes. Per the giant 16-page table I made of them.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone live with that? Any other comments online before we move on to the next item? Okay.
We have a co-presenter for the next item. So Lee Williams from Water Services, our acting Water Services Director, is here to talk about the urban growth boundary, and Lisa was going to talk about the rural growth boundary. You want to do the rural growth boundary first? I think it might be a little faster.
It might be simpler.
Yeah.
Everyone, we'll take a break after this one before we go into item 9.
And so these were both introduced as memos in the packet. And in terms of the rural growth boundary update, if you will, currently both in the regional plan and the comprehensive plan, the rural growth boundaries, which only apply to the areas outside of the city, are addressed in the comprehensive plan as having been identified by the regional plan. So, and if you look at the maps that have been put together for the new regional plan update, we haven't identified the rural growth boundaries on those maps. So what we, in order to clarify that the rural growth boundaries still exist, basically, we're not going to just drop them. we'll address them in this manner in the comprehensive plan update. So there are policies and direction for how the rural growth boundary is used on unincorporated land in the county. And we'll have a visual, a graphic in the comprehensive plan to show where they are. So if you think about the map, and they basically surround the communities that are essentially area plans within the county. Belmont, Fina, Mountain Air, parts of the Fort Valley 180 scenic corridor, and Donny Park, Timberline, Fernwood. So, you know, they're not within the city limits, and you know, it serves in a similar way as urban growth boundary. It denotes where growth should be in the rural areas. You know, it should be concentrated. It serves the same sort of concentrated development. So, you know, it's interesting because past iterations of the regional plan did call out those rural growth boundary areas for the parts of those sections of the county. So we just thought that this would be a good way to essentially transfer the discussion of that directly to the comprehensive plan. That makes sense.
Sort of what we did without intention. Just we had not brought them onto the map. And then when people noticed they were missing,
we wanted to make sure that, because they are important, you know, they do identify lands in the county that should be developed versus adjacent lands that, you know, are at least at this point appropriate to stay as open space, what have you. Like it. Good, done. Are we done? Or did you want to ask for any other comments?
are there comments online on the rural growth boundary question? And the decision to leave it out of the regional plan and let it only be in the comprehensive plan? Going once, going twice. That one's easy. I didn't think anybody would object because we hadn't missed it the first time except a few people, but since we were bringing up the urban growth boundary, we wanted to bring those in too. So there were quite a few comments on the urban growth boundary. You as a group had questions in September of trying to propose something more flexible and different to the community and seeing what kind of feedback that generated, and council and the water commission also have that conversation, all agreed, let's put it out there, let's see what concerns people have. And then we did get comments back on it, and they were mostly concerns and issues people did not support. The sentiment of most of the comments was they did not support it being a minor plan amendment to adjust the urban growth boundary. So staff has come back with an amendment that a different approach that would keep it a major plan amendment, include the connection between water and sewer that we talked about in order to support the reclaimed water system. And then also an emerging issue that I'm going to let Lee explain about the Red Gap Branch pipeline and settlement agreements, because
should I just?
Yeah, come up here.
Good evening, everybody. Lee Williams, Water Services Interim Director.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Still have most of it. So as we were working through the process on Red Gap Ranch, we felt it was important to bring it to the attention of the regional plan because there are some implications. Some history on Red Gap Ranch for people who don't know. The city voters approved the purchase of Red Gap Ranch in 2007. It is a parcel that is approximately 35 miles east of Flagstaff. It is sandwiched between I-40 and the Navajo Reservation, or the Navajo Nation. I-40 to the south, Navajo Nation to the north, and it's near Meteor City. We bought it for a future source for water, for drinking water. Council approved this, moving forward with this project, taking care of right-of-ways and securing this as a source for future water for the city of Flagstaff. As we're working through this process, there was a settlement agreement recently is called, referring it to as NWRSA, NAIWRSA. That's Northeastern Arizona Indian Water Rights Settlement Act. Because this well field is so close to the Navajo Nation, we have been in discussions with the Navajo Nation on how much water we can pump out of the ground without affecting the groundwater on the nation. NWRSA basically solidifies that agreement with the Navajo Nation and the Hopi tribe. So Flagstaff has an allotment of water that we can pump out of Red Gap Ranch. The Navajo Nation has an allotment of water that will be pumped out of the ranch, as does the Hopi tribe. So the reason this comes into play with the regional plan is that that water will be piped to the city of Flagstaff along the I-40 corridor for the most part. And we, according to NWRSA, we will be providing that allotment of water to the two nations, Navajo Nation and the Hopi tribe. Technically it's their allotment of water, but it will be delivered through city pipes. So we just wanted to make sure that Red Gap Ranch was addressed in the regional plan so that as we move forward with this project, there aren't hiccups. I know the UGB was addressed. So we're not technically providing water services to these groups along I-40. What we're basically doing is providing their allotment of water, but we just wanted to make sure that this was addressed. So does anybody have any questions about the particulars? Yeah.
It's not that.
I'm looking at, just the new,
Yeah, we sent out an updated memo on this last night because they added some info.
and that's great. It talks about the expanding the capacity for future water supplies. But it also, I mean, related to Red Gap Ranch, but it also talks about advanced water purification, indirect aquifer storage, and expansion of the reclamation system. So can you tell me about those parts? Because I understand Red Gap Ranch kind of stuff. Why is it all looped together?
Let me just make it clear. That is how, that language, except for the highlighted portions, is how we action item. So this is an action item that the committee and staff worked on together. But we'd like to add the or other entitlements for a regional project consistent with NWRSA because we didn't know a NWRSA would exist when we wrote it. And we want to make sure that it's clear that that's included when we talk about Red Gap Ranch now that we're working towards that settlement.
And to address your question also in another way, part of the feasibility study that we're going through the Red Gap Ranch water supply, there is a no action item. So they're going to look at these other ways that Flagstaff might meet future need for water. And if we can meet it with reclaimed water or advanced water treatment or different ways of conserving, then that no action item becomes the direction that we move in with this project. Lead.
So the policy WR dot question mark, do not extend water services without sewer. Is that in response to the conveyance from Red Gap Ranch into this? What?
So that was, as to best of my knowledge, that was an existing bullet point in the regional plan, is that if we extend water services, then we want to have sewer services also. The two must be attached so that we can get the reclaimed water back to recycle it and reuse it. As far as Red Gap Ranch is concerned, we're not technically giving them or selling them our water in the same way that Water Services provides water right now. So there would not be sewer service provided to these other partners in the project. So Red Gap Ranch is a bit of an outlier in that respect.
I have a hard time supporting that policy. To not provide water without sewer, I guess. And so I just want to understand my issue with it was more on a smaller scale. So I just want to understand on a larger scale if it's tied to Red Gap Ranch.
It's more tied to the advanced water treatment. That if we are at the point where we are trying to get to a no action on Red Gap Ranch and we're moving in a direction where we're recycling water and reusing it, then we need to recapture as much of our water as possible. And if someone is getting city water, but then putting it in a septic tank, we're losing our ability to do advanced water treatment and to create enough volume to make that a viable alternative to expanding regional water sources.
feel like that would really only apply to existing neighborhoods that are within the city limits that don't get city infrastructure. Because everything else from here forward would probably be done in a subdivision process where you'd bring it in. So we're talking about some very specific areas of Flagstaff that would probably have a really hard time even sewering, but they could get water instead of having to have it hauled or delivered, which has a pretty big impact.
As a side note, Water Services has introduced code to City Council. We went through the second read this week to introduce pressurized sewer systems to the city of Flagstaff so that we can provide sewer to those areas that are downgrade and not within that sewer shed that are within city limits.
Yeah, and I think that change in our sewer policy means that there are no longer areas we can't sewer. They're just places that are more expensive to sewer because they need to have pressurized sewer. Is that correct?
So I see that, I think I see a point where Julie said there's a huge difference between saying going to extend sewer and water services, to a new subdivision that's outside the growth boundary. And there is to, saying we're going to extend sewer and water services to the parcel that's down the street from my house, right next to your office, that's 4 acres or whatever, like on a major road. And it's kind of only there because of the mistake of the past, right? Like it should have been annexed. It makes sense to annex it. So how do we give ourselves as a community kind of like the flexibility to fix little problems when we have them, without saying, okay, we're going to blow out our urban growth boundary to like include all of Donny Park, right? Which is what people think is going to happen.
Erin Young had her hand up. I don't know
Go ahead,
if you want to speak to that or something previous.
Oh, yeah, thanks. I just wanted to share a perspective. The water rights settlements within the Little Colorado River watershed are a really big deal. We've been working on water rights settlements for decades. And when the Navajo and Hopi and San Juan Southern Paiute agreed to come to the table to settle water rights, 38 other communities in northern Arizona are part of the settlement, including Flagstaff. Because this just happened at the end of last year, actually Lee Williams brought to the regional plan attention, hey, Nawarsa happened, and does that need to be in the regional plan? Because the Nawarsa water settlement Red Gap Ranch is mentioned. It doesn't mean it will be constructed, but it is mentioned. And it's basically a permanent water rights settlement among the 39 parties. And the governor has signed it. So for water rights people, it's done. And if the Navajo Hopi, it's basically wheeling water. If there is a centralized pipeline, then we may be obligated to wheel their water to their point of delivery. So I don't know if that helps at all. It's a very separate thing from the other two policies, and it really should be recognized in the regional plan somehow. It doesn't mean that the city of Flagstaff won't be looking at all these other water resources and how we can utilize all of our sources for meeting long-term water demand. So I don't know if that helps at all. I hope that helps. Thank you for letting me chime in.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks, Erin. And it is huge. I mean, it's a big congratulations, a really, really big deal to arrive at that. So I think that the important part I heard you say, Erin, is that the 3 policies that are presented are not tied together. Like I was reading them as if they were somehow tied together. And they're not. So my concern about the second policy has nothing to do with Red Gap Ranch. And personally, I'm fully supportive of the third policy in here about that regional pipeline. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you don't need to have a concern about us like spurring a pipe off of this regional pipeline to supply communities that are within city limits. This is going to be strictly a conveyance pipeline. It's not going to be a distribution network. Is that?
No, I would like the opportunity to extend water service and not require sewer service to some communities in Flagstaff. Because there are neighborhoods in Flagstaff that do not have public water that are within the city of Flagstaff limits. And they need fire hydrants. And if you're gonna extend the mains, then they should have an opportunity to do water services. And maybe it's not financially feasible to provide sewer. So that's where I'm coming from on the second bullet. And so by saying do not do that, that is very strong language. And it doesn't leave any room for discussion about an opportunity or a particular situation. That's what I'm getting at with both.
I thought it allowed for a plan amendment, right?
Yeah, you can do a major
Major
plan
plan
amendment
amendment.
if you want to extend water without sewer. You can still do a plan amendment. And I mean, maybe that's
Yeah,
where,
but I mean, that's like when you've got 4 houses and you really just want to get a hydrant in there, you don't want to do a major plan amendment.
well, and it does say, it could be that we break out the fire safety part of the WR question mark and say, we can provide hydrants for fire safety outside the urban growth boundary if we want to, because having hydrants protects our community too, because it creates water sources for firefighting while in urban interface, but
Somewhere in the urban growth boundary. That's my point.
the ones in the urban.
I'm not talking about outside of the urban growth boundary. I'm talking about inside the urban growth.
Like the county islands, like
No,
the county islands.
like Kinlawny or
Yeah.
out Harold Ranch Road or these isolated pockets throughout the city of Flagstaff within city limits, within the urban growth boundary that don't have water or sewer infrastructure.
And if they're on a septic in those scenarios, they're large lots already, right?
I know would be an
In general.
exception to that, but in
Not
general.
But so I'm just thinking to the point of, right, if the goal is to not lose our water, if we're really just talking about places, like 2 acre, 5 acre lots, we're not talking about losing a lot of water for residential, problem.
Yeah.
Actually, those big lots use a lot more water than like an apartment does, because they tend to use it in the yard and
Yeah, on a per capita
yeah,
basis.
on a per capita basis, it's
but
way
because-
more water.
Yeah, but because you could have 100 people in one apartment building and only 20 homes.
Yeah.
I think we're kind of reopening something, but I kind of agree with Julie.
Yeah, I'm not ready to speak on the development agreements that would have to go into place to do that.
Yeah. But can we make it just less explicit? Less do not, thou shalt. So
We'll also had a question in the chat too about how big is the diameter of Red Gap Branch's pipeline? Like how much water are you actually conveying?
I don't know the diameter, but Aaron, can you correct me on this? I believe it's 12,000 acre feet for Flagstaff. And can you tell me the allotments for Navajo and Hopi?
That's per annum.
Per annum, per year.
You know what? The pipeline is, I believe, a 30-inch is what the one design is, but there's no a size hasn't been settled on per se. There are too many variables really at this point. The water rights in the settlement agreement at Red Gap are 22,000 acre feet, which is way more than Flagstaff would ever need. but that does include these other allotments. And the city did provide a presentation to the Water Commission on the Red Gap Ranch pipeline, and that is available online. You could get all the details on one feasibility study that's been done. If that would help, I could send a link.
Yeah, if you send the link, I could send that out to the whole committee. Probably too much to get into in a 20-minute conversation.
Yeah. There's almost 20 years of history related to this project. So, and there's probably 20 years of history ahead of us. So a lot of things could change.
I just had a point of clarification. Which bullet point are we talking about? The policy WR question mark, the first one.
Yeah, the first one, the WR.
Do not extend water services without sewer.
That's the only one I have an issue with.
And that wasn't a change from the previous
wasn't.
version of the regional plan.
That one we just brought forward from the draft. So we had already discussed that one prior.
Opening stuff was supposed to be finished.
I think I think
Um,
I'm still out. You gave me another chance. You gave me another chance.
I do appreciate when you all scold each other for scope creep though, so thank you.
So, my proposal was that we just make the do not language more like,
Consistent with everything.
Okay.
yeah, it's consistent with everything else. We don't have Harvard, yes, you know.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to look back and see who the author of that language was.
I think it was Mac, and it was Mac and Jackson and our team.
Max mentioned it to me before.
Maybe Mac and Jackson can.
Back in
Is Mac on?
earlier.
Hi, Mac.
I think we can go back and discuss it, but I do remember that it's actually really, what I remember them saying at the last meeting was that it's a really important part of our strategy to have advanced water treatment, is that we've got to stop letting people put our water in a septic tank if we're gonna get serious about having drinking water come from that as a source that keeps from building a 30-inch pipeline. That's how many miles? 30?
35, maybe
Yeah.
40, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and there's also, I guess you could say, do not extend to new development. Because I care a lot more
I
about
think-
fixing the people
Yeah.
who are already in town, paying their taxes, and don't even get any damn water.
Yeah, we have some homes west or north of the Home Depot on the west side of town, that little county development, little tiny parcels. They're on septic, but on city water. And we occasionally get them wanting to go on city water. We want to avoid that in the future. Exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, that's the opposite of what I'm saying.
Can I just jump in?
Okay.
And then from Aaron and Lee, as far as, the city providing water to those county inholdings. And could you just clarify for all of us, what is the policy on that? Because from City Water Services, because I was under the impression that, that would actually encourage annexation then.
So our policy is to not provide water services outside of city limits. There are a few communities that are grandfathered in, such as Pinedale and I think that what we're talking about is that Dunham area.
I don't know.
Okay,
Yeah, Dunham.
yeah. So
Yeah, it requires the annexation.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
require them to sign a pre-annexation
that's what I thought.
agreement in order to get water services.
Because there are some county islands, if you will, that are under county jurisdiction, but they're within the city limits and within the urban growth boundary. So I think that's partly where maybe Julie's question is coming from.
Well, there are areas that are city parcels that we have not provided water.
Okay, and there's that nuance as well. So kind of both
Yeah, the
considerations.
Quintana.
they're existing. My thoughts currently are that they would have to bring their systems up to city standard and then they could connect to the city sewer and the city water. But again, if that takes a major amendment or not is a decision of this group.
We have a proposal to change the language in this policy, the second bullet point, WR question mark from do not extend to something that's absolute.
Or to new development,
Yeah, or just
or
saying,
to new development.
yeah, or do
Do not extend water services without sewer to maintain the ability to recycle, use reclaimed water. So do not extend water services to new development.
Yeah, well,
with
that's,
code.
you prefer that?
I can live with that.
You can live with it? Okay. I can live with it. Can everyone else live with that, or does anyone else have any other comments before we get to that point?
Yeah, I'd just like to ask how much are we talking about? When we say, we add new development to that, what's grandfathered in that to get that? I mean, are we talking, I don't have any perspective of how much we're talking.
Probably 200 parcels would be my guess, just off the cuff.
Wouldn't know. Yeah, they'd have to look.
I'm just concerned that it wouldn't leave, that it would affect, I mean, the reason it's there is so you can have water for reclaimed water use. So what kind of impact would it have?
Yeah, but I mean, if we're talking about the hundreds, right, out of, what else do we have?
29,000.
29,000?
I mean, if we put new development in there, I think we would want to make sure we would define that too as people doing lot splits. Because that's where it starts to get hairy, right? Is when people have 10 acres and we give them a water service and then they split and they just run a distribution line to the next one. And then 10 years later, both of those parcels split and suddenly we have a small subdivision that occurred and we're suddenly providing 4 houses and they're all using septic tanks. So I mean, I think we have to take that to MAC and legal and figure out how to make sense of that so that we don't get in. So we aren't encouraging what we call wildcat subdivisions.
Address that for sure.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I can't unilaterally say that's an okay change to make. It's gonna have to go to the team.
No, that's fine. That's all we're asking. Okay, everyone live with that, and then we'll take a break before we move on to future growth illustration and land use framework changes.
Wait, there's a hand up.
We have a hand up.
Walter has his hand up. Walter.
Yes, maybe this is a community development question, but I was just curious. Let's just say the water line is running along I-40, but when you get from Winona and then westward into the city, you also got the right of way with the railroad tracks. So if you were going to tee off in maybe some lot on the north side of the freeway, you would have to go through 2 right of ways in order to get that connection anywhere along that area. So I'm just curious. We're not. You're not really. I mean, I think this is, like I said, it's a community development something they worry about, not something that we would worry about. Or is it? I'm just curious about that. I mean, it's probably not something that we need to worry about for any subcategory here.
Mr. Phelps, Erin has her hand up and she probably can address this better than I can, but the pipeline plans, current plans, it does veer off of the I-40 corridor in that Cosnino area. So Erin, maybe she had her hand up.
Okay.
Well, maybe it is a question, actually, I'm sorry, for Sarah and the team, whether that is part of the regional plan. I think that is the question, Walter. So I won't answer.
I mean, the Cosnino area is within the region. Is that the question?
Well, I'm just curious.
I don't know how it is impacted by the pipeline.
I guess I'm just curious. I don't know which the water. If you're going to go from Red Gap Ranch, I mean, just common sense, the water line would be on the north side of the freeway, westward. But when you get to Winona, then you're intersecting with the railroad tracks right there. So is the water line going to go on the north side of the railroad tracks?
To the north.
North side of the railroad tracks. Okay. So
yeah, That's a whole engineering study. There were many different water line alternatives looked at before selecting the alternative that works with ADOT and state land and the railroad and APS, you know, all the parties. So as Lee said, it does split up. It actually comes up, the preferred alternative comes up Townsend Winona Road. And that detailed presentation I mentioned that was given to the Water Commission does, you know, provide those details if you want to look at that.
No, it's just, I'm fine with that. I was just curious about all those right of ways that are kind of overlapping each other in that whole region.
All right,
I'm
guys,
good.
well, we're gonna take a break. Come back in 5 or 10. 10 minutes, please. All right, everyone, we're going to reconvene for everyone online. All right, folks, and we do have one change to the agenda. I believe we only have two people here from the public who want to make comment. Didn't that left? Yeah.
I think there's someone online.
Yeah, they Snell and Wilmager. And so we're going to move the public participation up to after this future growth. Actually, yeah, I get no. Let's do it now. Let's do it first. We believe that both of those comments are on this item, so let's hear them now, and then those folks can take their children home.
So if you're online and you want to do public comment, we're going to move that up to the next few minutes. Is there anyone online from the public that wants to offer public comment?
Sure. This is Nick Wood. I'm the Snell and Wilmer guy.
Great. Start your, how much time are we giving people? 3 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure,
I'll
I can
start
make
with
this.
3 minutes
I can
for you,
make
Nick.
this. Yeah, I can. Thank you. We've sent a couple of letters, and Noel Grimsman, our senior planner this morning, sent another one. And really, I only have a couple of comments for purposes of this meeting. One has to do with, density calculations in the plan. It's your agenda item 9A. I guess I can, break it down into something fairly simple. It's important for us to make sure that when we're talking about mixed use, and I know that residential and densities, which I'm going to talk about in a moment, are very important to Flagstaff going forward. But we want to make sure that because we're talking about Little America, and obviously Little America is a resort, has well over 500 acres, and right now they're going through some exercises internally, regarding potential, and again, potential development patterns in the future. And of course, flexibility is a critical part of that. And, we're very supportive of all of the work that you're doing right now. But one of the things we want to make sure is as we go through this process, because it's very likely that we'll have some mixed use elements going forward in the event of future development, that if we don't intend, when we have a mixed use project, if we don't intend to have residential be part of that mixed use, that somehow it's not otherwise required. And going through, the latest draft of the regional plan, it didn't appear to be clear. So again, we understand that some mixed use projects will include residential, but we want to make certain that if we do have a mixed use project that is not intended to have residential, that somehow we're not compelled to have residential just because it's a mixed use. The second item really has to do with the designations of suburban neighborhood. Right now we're looking at suburban neighborhood, but there's a proposed change to suburban neighborhood high density on a portion of our property. And of course, that's a potential problem for us because of the minimum densities that are being suggested. So right now, if we're just suburban neighborhood, you have a minimum density of 2 dwelling units per acre. Well, if it's converted to suburban neighborhoods high density, all of a sudden now we have a minimum of 7 dwelling units per acre. Obviously, as we look to building this out, we have to maintain that flexibility and not be compelled to build a minimum amount of density, which may not work. Again, depending upon the elements that we intend to include in the project. So we would ask that no part of the Little America property contain that suburban neighborhood high density designation, and that instead it all remain the suburban neighborhood. And with that, I'd be happy to answer
Nick,
any
that's your
questions that you might have.
time right there. Oh, okay. Thank you very much. And Todd, you want to go ahead? No, you good?
Is there anyone else online who wants to provide public comment? Okay, no one else raised their hand or unmuted?
All right, thanks for your comments. And Sarah, you want to?
Sure. So we are going to get the next thing on the agenda is changes to the future growth illustration and future land and the land use framework. And as the public commenter said, we got a lot of comments about wanting more certainty on how we would be calculating density for the plan. The challenge, the current plan, I have to tell you, has one sentence on density and it says it's units per acre. That's the whole shebang in the current plan. So there have been a lot of interpretations that we have had to make about like, well, what does that mean? Like, how do we interpret density? So like, for instance, we have a current interpretation that if you're getting a density bonus for doing sustainability features or for doing affordable housing, we don't count that if it's forcing you to exceed a maximum density because it's a bonus. We're not supposed to punish you for getting a bonus for doing something we're incentivizing. But the draft plan had tried to add a few more footnotes about it because we have had to do some clarification over the last 10 years, but there were just a ton of comments asking for more information, asking for more clarity. So these are the current footnotes on density calculations. And the memo includes what we would do instead. So in the memo, we said that basically we just needed to clarify that density is calculated using methods and procedures outlined in the respective code. And that is because the county and city do not have the same density calculation process. The code for the county does not include all the same things. It has some incentives for clustering that aren't in the city code. And so when we're processing a rezoning case, if we come up with a unified vision of a regional plan definition for density, everyone would have to calculate twice. So that could be very confusing for people. Why does it say it's 8 dwelling units per acre from the regional plan's perspective and 5 from the zoning code? That's maybe a little too far of a gap, but that's the kind of thing we want to avoid. So the first statement would just be, we're going to use whatever is the appropriate method for the jurisdiction you're in. And then we'll clarify and say if proposed as part of a master block plat or a specific plan, I'm going to add an area plan to that too. Density can be calculated across the entire area included within the plat or plan. So you can calculate it across the whole area, or you can just calculate it within a sub area if you're not sure what your future densities are.
I interrupt, sorry. So if you have like parcel, but for instance, like, some of it's never going to be developed because it's inaccessible or something, you can exclude that.
Yeah. But if you're but you need to like create a parcel using your plat process, right? You need to say, here's this parcel over here that we're not developing, or that might be developed sometime in the future when it can be accessed more readily. Like that happens, especially with topography, that maybe something up on the top of the hill or mesa has to develop for you to get a road, but it's all connected. You have to break those into pieces. You don't have to change the ownership, but you have to break them up with a plat. And then the last bullet would be, and I'll go back to the table for this, that requests to rezone into one of the existing compatible zoning categories would be assumed to be in conformance with the future desired density, even if it falls below or above it. And that's partially because these desired densities don't match what's in the code right now. They're set a little higher in an effort to try and encourage the code to be revised in a manner that lets us increase densities in these categories. So for instance, let's look at the neighborhood ones, Elsa. Yeah, we'll make it larger. Okay, so one of the differences right now between suburban neighborhood high density and suburban neighborhood medium density is that the R1, R1N zones are not allowed in suburban neighborhood high density. They're not assumed to be in conformance. Part of what we are going to propose is in a later chapter, we'll kind of explain that. But we would use these categories in this column. And if you wanted to rezone to R1, but the minimum density was higher than what you were rezoning to, but it was allowed by R1, we would say it was conforming. Because for the time being, it is. Does
So
that make sense?
Yes, sorry, I'm gonna interrupt again.
No, it's okay. I'm trying to.
So if you have something big, like Little America, 526 acres, you're gonna be coming in with an amendment anyway, right?
Not necessarily. You could just be coming in with a plat and some zoning amendments.
Yeah.
You definitely could be coming in with zoning amendments if you're not planning to use existing entitlements. But it might just be a plat and a master plat and rezoning.
But does that give you any flexibility during that process to change? I'm not even saying change, but just provide more detail, right, than we have on this map here in terms of what your categories are. We have just taken section, like, I mean, we've got the SLP 20, right? It's just a section and we put it all in one thing, right? It was obviously when it gets developed, it's going to be more.
Yeah, I mean, it would depend. Like, so even if you're in like the big state land parcel, the that you called SLP 20, which is the end of Walnut Canyon or Country Club and Butler, essentially where they will meet up in the future to create a new neighborhood. There is neighborhood level commercial allowed in suburban neighborhoods. So like that's a suburban neighborhood high density. You can rezone any part of that parcel to neighborhood community commercial to build your shopping center and to build your amenities that might be commercial shopping area for your residents. It doesn't require the plan to change. That's allowed. It's NCC in the city, and then any categories that are comparable in the county is allowed in that category. It's not, neighborhoods are not limited to residential per the table in the plan.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that answers Nick's question, but that wasn't my question.
Yeah.
My question was, say you've got SLP 20 there and it makes sense for 25 acres that are immediately adjacent to the neighbor, to some of the neighboring properties to match that, in terms of density, which might be R1, but it's not the entire section because you're trying to be more nuanced. If you were going through a major plan amendment process, you could, based on a master plan, you could do that, right?
Right, yeah, you could have an
It's
area.
just obviously like having that being just a giant old straight line is not good planning.
You could have an argument that, yes, I have this one area of larger lots, maybe half-acre lots.
Yeah.
But across my whole area, the density average is about 10 units per acre. And so, yeah, that's the kind of thing you could do. So you could have a continuum of density in different places through a large enough area that was master planned.
But a major plan amendment though as well can just change the colors.
Yeah, that's where you change the colors. You're doing something that we couldn't allow. So that's those 3 bullets would allow these couple of things to happen. One, if you are developing in one of those zones and it just matched what's allowed, you can just do that. Even if the density calculation you're getting falls a little bit under that desired density. But if you are wanting a zone that is not allowed and you're not doing anything to bring up the density elsewhere, so it kind of averages out for a plat, then that is what could trigger a major plan amendment. No. That was it. There's 3 bullets. I'm trying to keep, well, are there more? Sorry. Yeah, sorry, there are a few more. So, yeah, then we kept the language that's in there currently. It says you can exclude density bonuses. That we've been doing that for 10 years. And then I added some clarification that new transect zones would be adopted through the creation of a traditional neighborhood community plan. This only applies to the city, which would focus on achieving desired future densities. There's no transects in the table. And so the hope would be that transect zones are trying to get to the future desired density. That's how we would look at them.
Kind of how the TMP is written already, right?
Yeah, it is. And then lastly, and this is the language I think that Mr. Wood was referring to in his comments, is commercial or industrial parcels that don't include housing shouldn't be part of the base acreage. So if you're building something, but you're building a neighborhood, but one area is your whole, there's no mixed use here, it's just commercial, we wouldn't take that acreage and include it in your density calculation. Maybe it's an employer, maybe it's a, anchor commercial use, but that's not there. You're not going to have a unit base and it's going to artificially lower your density throughout the area.
Did that not also apply to open space?
There's been some discussion of that because the county's code does have some provisions for.
So it's the subdivision code specifically in the county that encourages basically cluster conservation design. And there are incentives for a slightly increased density bonus if a developer, and we've only had a handful of subdivisions use that. And you can use your open space as part of the overall calculation, but then that is set aside, as a deeded area. But your density can increase using that calculation. So there's a little bit of a difference there between how the county current subdivision ordinance already works versus, the calculation was being decided in the regional. That make sense?
Yeah, I mean, and I see that in that sense, right? It kind of incentivizes you to.
And that's the idea. So an example of it is Johnson Ranch in Donny Park. Those parcels, or rather those lots are, I believe it's zoned for 2.5 acres.
Is that the
Because,
landfill?
pardon me?
Landfill road?
Uh-huh. Yeah, but those are actually 1 acre. I think they're about 1 acre lots. But overall density is because they set aside a significant amount of open space. And so they were able to get a few additional parcels because they did that cluster conservation design, which is really important to the county. It's a good method to conserve open space and protect natural areas. So that's been in our subdivision ordinance for a long time.
What's the counter argument, sir?
For why we would,
Not including it?
Tiffany, do you want to speak to that? Tiffany just put something in the chat, but I'd like her to speak to it if she wouldn't mind.
So the question is about why open space?
Why would we not want to exclude open space from the base density of a larger master planned area?
So it depends. We do density based on gross. So we are different, I believe, from the county in that regard. We don't do net, we do gross. So our density calculations per our zoning code include open space and include rights of ways and all of the easements. Now, not every development is required to have open space. So really only planned residential development, which is similar to that conservation subdivision design principle. It's a clustering. It allows you to create smaller lots, but does require 15% of the site as open space. There are 2 other zoning categories that by right just always require 15% open space, and that's the medium density and the high density zones. But they fall under that gross calculation. And then the zoning code also does include minimum density standards already.
If my thought is if you're deeding something like for a park, or if you have like the Rogers Lake, that's Rogers Lake, right? Over by Flag Ranch. If you have like that sort of scenario.
So it depends, right? There's open space that stays within the subdivision boundaries. I could point out Timber Sky, for example. There's a swath of land. It's specifically zoned as open space. So it's a separate tract of land. It is privately owned. It does include public amenities for the overall development. That is not included in the density calculations. But if it's open space within just a tract within the subdivision, then yes, it would be included. If it was the open space required in affiliation with a multifamily development, yes, it would be included. But if you deed a piece of land for a park, it's not going to be included per the zoning code in terms of your development. So it's no longer part of your development site.
It's just a different policy. Okay.
Right, and so I think that the open space piece is currently covered by the first bullet, which is density is calculated using methods and procedures outlined in the code. We did try and come up with some like unifying language about it because it came up in a lot of comment letters as well. But the codes treat them so differently that we couldn't find language that really covered all instances that would possibly occur under both codes. That could be clear enough. So we kind of bounced back to, let's just say it's part of how calculate density per codes.
So there will it'll get tricky with the commercial and industrial because you could have a pad within a parcel that's commercial that you now got to exclude, right?
Yeah.
So where are you setting the boundaries of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we could certainly say that like it can be non-residential mixed use too, because I mean, I don't think when we look at an area and if all the uses are commercial, we consider that a commercial area.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because the mixed use generally implies there is a residential component to it.
We've only ever called mixed use something that's residential plus something.
Right.
Yeah, if you have a hotel plus a conference center plus a shopping area, that's all commercial.
Mm-hmm.
Even, yeah, an office building in R&D and a commercial center, that's still not mixed use.
The county looks at that the same way, correct?
So we looked at mixed use specifically, and this was a recent zoning code update, as including a residential component. So in county code currently, mixed use is allowed in all commercial zones. And it's not defined as in terms of a ratio, but as long as there's a residential component to a commercial site, then that can be used as mixed use. So that's a pretty flexible update that we recently did.
And probably the only exception in the city code is that some industrial properties allow a caretaker unit.
The county has that as well.
And we don't really count that as mixed
No,
use. That's just
different, yeah.
someone to provide 24-hour security on a site that might have valuable.
Yeah, county mirrors that too.
Yeah.
Caretakers are allowed in industrial.
Okay. Shall you have something to say?
Are there any questions or, and then Tiffany pointed out lived work is also allowed industrial, but that's a different housing situation. That's where you're an employee or an owner living on your site, not, it's also not been used. Caretaker properties have been used.
I had a question about the talks about new transit zones.
Mhm.
About the creation of traditional neighborhood community plans. So that's like Southside has.
So Southside has a current transect zone and there's a regulatory plan that's like a TNCP, yeah, that was drawn to create that. But let's say a new subdivision wanted to use, new urbanist transect zoning, and they have to come up with a plan like the downtown regulating plan. And we would just look at, did they meet the desired densities with what they put in their TNCP? We do it at the TNCP level.
Okay.
And then they would apply it within their area.
I think I understand that.
That's one of the areas where the resource protection for the trees has been really hard because the TNCPs do have minimum densities, pretty aggressive minimum densities in them already. And then fitting that into the sort of new urbanist, layout that's kind of like in that, ideology and methodology is really hard with the amount of trees that you have to protect.
Don't the traditional neighborhood community plans, they only exist for developed neighborhoods like older neighborhoods.
You can write one. We have a portion of the city code that lets you create one. So Tiffany has her hand up and she can give you the details.
Currently, our transect zones are only applied to the downtown regulating area, which is, Michelle, as you pointed out, is sort of centered around our central business district. The transect zones don't actually have density standards in them. Where you do find density standards are in the actual building types, but it's usually a range. So a particular building uh, type could have a range of density allowances anywhere from like say 4 to 12 units an acre, and then it's really to the developer's decision. So it's not your typical conventional zoning at all. We do have the ability for if somebody wanted to opt in and rezone areas into the transect zones, they could do that. We have not yet done that.
Oh, I didn't understand it because I've never heard of that.
It exists as a process.
Thanks for the explanation, Tiffany.
Other questions about density calculations before? Is this an acceptable 6-bullet solution, I guess, as part of, is the final?
I can live with it. Can everyone live with it? More than live with
It's better than just saying units per acre and go get them, which is kind of what we had before.
it. Well, you didn't have that problem because there was never, this is a new thing.
Tiffany, do you have something to add? Go ahead.
I do just want to add that, when you do flash over to the table of, so to your last point about, being able to, right. So like urban neighborhoods, for example, the future desired density is more than 20 units an acre. The maximum you could achieve in the MR zone is 14 units an acre. But with the RPO, it's 9 units an acre. So in some ways, it's important to understand that this would assume that maybe these zoning districts get bumped in terms of what their overall density becomes in order to comply with the regional plan.
Right. If someone were rezoning an urban neighborhood parcel to MR before we got MR increased in density, then I think that what the bullets would tell you to do is say MR is allowed in urban neighborhoods, and if that's the density allowed by MR today, then that can move forward. So it's giving us some grace, but also with the continued push that we have to start to get densities up for cost effectiveness and climate change and all the things we've talked about for the last year.
Well, that would last until the rezone happened. How long would that last, that kind of?
Until
Well,
we got code updates through.
Yeah, it could be a code update to change the zone or the density standards within the actual zoning district to recalibrate based on these.
I have a question, then point of clarification. Is there a trigger then in the zone update?
Tiffany's working on all of them for us.
Yeah, no, I get that. I just.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a trigger. It's we have plenty of dreams and a plan that we never get to in the 10 years it takes to implement them. I hope we can get to some of the density ones because I think they're very tied to the land availability and suitability study and the code diagnostic and the emergencies that we've declared as a city. But they're, the process has to go through the process, so. And the legislature keeps writing all these fun bills that Tiffany has to think about adjusting the code for. Yeah, with tight deadlines. So that's been fun. That's an ongoing fun thing too. So
To 9B then?
yeah, I saw yeses in the chat and I think we're good on density calculations. I'll let, Elsa's been working on 9B. Let her pull that one up.
Sure. So 9B is about the suburban neighborhood category. And I'm just going to scroll back to where this is in the land use framework because I think the pictures are helpful here. So in the 2014 plan, the current regional plan, we had one suburban category. In this plan, we proposed two. One is suburban neighborhood high density, and one is suburban neighborhood medium density. And then the one that the category that's less dense than this is rural neighborhood. And these two categories recognize that there is a gradient of density within neighborhoods that are suburban in their pattern. There's, as you can see by these pictures, there's neighborhoods that have single family homes and a suburban road network. And then there's also neighborhoods that have a pattern that have these apartment buildings and have more density. And there's a difference in the density range currently. The high density range is 10 to 40 dwelling units, and the medium range is 2 to 29 dwelling units. Some of the comments that we got back on these two categories, and I can also switch over to the map so we can look at it that way. For that, given the plan's push for density, why are there still so many areas that are shown in that lighter yellow, which is the less dense suburban neighborhood medium density? And also talking about how these categories are applied in the city. There are, questions why is there like a dividing line in these areas between these two suburban categories? And then also comments about the urban growth boundary and its importance. So our proposal, and then there were also comments related to density calculations about in some of these larger parcels achieving the difficulty of achieving density in the existing draft, the way that those calculations were written. So the proposal is to, within the urban growth boundary, all suburban neighborhoods would change to suburban neighborhood high density. And outside of the urban growth boundary, any suburban neighborhood would be the medium density category. And where those mostly are, Kachina, Mountain Air, there's some suburban down here. There's some suburban out here in Belmont too. But most of the county is rural neighborhood. And then as the category is changing and increasing in density, we are also adjusting at the same time the minimum density for suburban neighborhood high density to bring it down a little bit from 10 to 7. I think those are the 3 points from the memo. Is there anything else to add, Sarah?
I think Michelle had emailed me a question earlier in the day about this, of like trying to think of some mental benchmarks for some of these. So a difference between a suburban neighborhood medium densities maximum and a suburban neighborhood that is high densities maximum is, the buildings across the street or the apartments along Lake Mary Road are often getting pretty close to 22 to 29 units an acre. The garden apartment style can kind of be in that mid and upper 20s. Tiffany did a great job. We've been talking this week over email about what are different density examples that we can share with people. And the one that she found that kind of came closest to the 40 is Fremont Station, which is behind Walmart. Is a 5-story cluster of apartment buildings. That is about 38 units per acre. So that's 232 units on 6 acres. So that would be the suburban neighborhood high density maximum. And it is a mixed use project right now. So that it has, if you took away that first floor, you could do that as all residential in a suburban neighborhood high density. So it would increase that. On
the minimum.
Yeah, on the minimum side, the villas on Lake Mary Road are a little higher than the minimum. They're the new, trying to think, they're 2-story buildings. They're on the left side of Lake Mary Road. They're about 14 dwelling units per acre. So they're low, but they're not quite 7. I don't know if we found any that were exactly 7.
We had There's the bungalows on Macmillan Mesa, which I can pull up
Oh,
on
yeah.
Street View, is 7.6.
Okay.
I can pull that up in a sec.
So the,
Density of 500 acres.
yeah, so the bungalows they're pretty tight as a little neighborhood. They get really tight. So I think one of the reasons is the greenfield developers, in speaking to us, have said there's so much topography and other things they have to meet, that meeting that suburban neighborhood high density is harder in a new neighborhood than an existing neighborhood. They still have a pretty high upper end. So another way to do it could be to make some adjustments to the upper end of suburban neighborhood medium density. That might be a challenge for the county, but we could spread it out a little more that way too, if we wanted to see more. But like Timber Sky as a neighborhood as a whole, which is right here south of the city, all of that would be suburban neighborhood medium. Probably the whole neighborhood might come really close to 7, even though there's apartments in one corner and single family homes in another. But I'm not sure exactly that works there. It might be, but I think it would kind of be on the cusp. So, yeah, other side of the street, sorry, the south side of the street from the Public Works yard. Oh, Tiffany showed something. Sorry, what was that? A different screen. Can you put that back up, Tiffany?
Oh, no, that's me.
Oh, did you? What were
Yeah,
you showing?
this is the 7. This is the neighborhood with 7 dwelling
It's
units.
across the street. Those are single family.
You're on the wrong side of the street.
Here we go.
Sorry. There it is. So these little bungalows.
So what was so the big change is within the city, we're getting, the suggestion is get rid of all the medium density suburban and turn it all into high density suburban.
Yeah, which would make a development like this the minimum, basically. Like that we'd be trying to get everybody to have at least this many.
And what was I didn't hear it articulated what the reasoning was.
A lot of the comments looking at our greenfield areas felt that or expressed that there is sort of a missed opportunity to have more density there with the plan's focus on infill, and that the map shows a lot of suburban neighborhood medium density where it potentially could show something higher density.
I think there was also a sentiment that at least I heard verbally in a meeting that it seemed like the suburban neighborhood high density was putting a large burden on existing residents and not getting enough density out of greenfield areas.
So those are just going to be kind of like traditional suburban.
This is too loud, honey. I can go somewhere else. No, not at all.
Yeah, so that's the general piece of it is, should we make a move on this? Because we have talked to a lot of property owners and we have tried to put suburban neighborhood high density everywhere. We felt there was a willing property owner who density was really goal, and they were willing to kind of try and work into those topics. But some of these parcels have very challenging topography. They have large floodplains in them. If those aren't going to be parks, they're really going to struggle to get to a higher minimum density, even if they have pockets of density. And that's just one of those broad brushstrokes that's really hard to get at with the plan. Yeah, if you Elsa's pulling up the map, you can see we've identified a few areas that are in the greenfield sites that are suburban neighborhood high density. It's not nowhere. It's just definitely, and I'll say specifically, the comments were about the John Wesley Powell area. And Michelle, you have your hand up. Would you like to add to that?
Yeah, no, thank you, Sarah, and thanks for this conversation. I just kind of want to underscore what Sarah is saying about maybe some of the challenges of meeting that higher density in these areas. I sound like I feel like a broken record because I say this often, but I mean, we want to be aspirational in what we do with this plan, but we also want it to be achievable. And the problem is if we set that bar too high and these large property owners out here can't develop can't even get in the door because they can't meet that density, they always have their underlying zoning, which is, in a lot of these places, that 1 acre per unit, or 1 unit per acre, sorry, I said that backwards. And so if they can't rezone, they're going to develop to that. And that's not what we really want either. So I think that this is an important conversation. And if there are any landowners, that are on the call, it might be worth kind of getting some of their perspective as part of this conversation. Thanks, Sarah.
Let me chime in. Can I hear?
David's,
So Scott Roberts with the 521 acres off of Woody Mountain. And, we are all about trying to maximize and create attainable housing and work on making something work for community, for the people here. But when you visit our property, there is a lot of trees. There's a lot of geography. There's a lot of beautiful rock outcroppings and also we have neighbors, both Flagstaff Ranch and the University Heights group. And if you put the kind of housing that would be required to be, if you take 7 units and take that across 521 acres, that's a lot of units. And then you basically, as a developer, you're not going to just mass grade that whole site, right? Because you can't with resource protection and topography. You're going to be turning something into something super dense. Because I mean, Timber Sky, for example, has a lot of big buildings on it now. That's a pretty dense property, and that would be the minimum I would have to do, the minimum. So likely, and I have more topography, that whole property got hit with a fire. They don't have any rock outcroppings. They don't have any mounds. So I'm gonna have much taller buildings to be able to make that work. And I don't think the neighbors are gonna really like that. I don't think the roads and the infrastructure can handle all that. And so you kind of, my specific situation, you back a developer into making the hard decision. I can't make this work. I mean, it won't, I can't build an overpass over I-40. I can't build the bigger boulevards. I can't do all of this work to make, call it 3,000, 4,000 homes on this piece of property work. And so then you go, okay, it's 521 lots. And I don't think that's where anyone wants to be. That's not where my heart's at. I mean, I really want to create something. So I think that one maybe solve potentially is looking at giving credit for open space, giving credit for resource protection, giving credit for all that, and then doing it more of and doing cluster development and create. I mean, right? People come to Flagstaff because it's not Phoenix, Arizona, that's mass graded subdivision, right? They come to Flagstaff for the beauty of Flagstaff. It'd be tough to just make a developer just take giant bulldozers, knock over all the great topography that people come here for, and do a mass graded subdivision, with 4 or 5 story tall multifamily to meet that 7 unit to the acre density. That's just tough. And so, we're really looking forward. I mean, the amount of work that all of you guys have put in, I really appreciate it. I wanted to come here and just listen, but now that you gave me the floor to mention that, I really think the open space should be considered in that density, because I think that's when we can create great parks and trails and open space and make that density potentially work.
is there anybody else on the call who's a property owner who'd like to speak to that a little more? It's just in case there's anyone online. And Walter, let me know, he's got to leave in 5 minutes. Walter, did you have anything for this topic? There's a hand up now for Jim Hill.
Jim Hill here for Little America. I would just echo very much the last two comments for Little America and what Nick Wood said on our behalf. I think Michelle said it well, and the previous speaker said it well. In our situation, we're trying to have the flexibility to really specialize in a resort use. And when you say 7 units per acre minimum, to me, it's just kind of like, well, forget it. You know, I mean, you just sort of like hit the too hard button. So, you know, and we do have the ER zoning, the underlying, I think, similar to the last speaker with the 1 acre lot minimums. I don't think that would be our ideal situation, and I do feel like a 7 unit per acre minimum really pushes us really hard and makes the whole thing again very, very difficult to see how to move forward. Whereas with more flexibility and at 2 units per acre with a very high then ceiling, the 2 to 29, to me that felt like, oh, we can make that work well. We also have the Rio de Flag floodplain, we've got cliffs, we've got a lot of challenging topo as well, as did the previous speaker. So I hate to go through this whole process and kind of come out of it saying, oh, forget it. and we've been having this conversation for months now. I mean, I think 6 months ago, candidly, I just feel like we're being force-fed density that isn't really a good fit for what we want to do with the property. Maybe we're not even really sure with clarity what we want to do. But I would add that to the conversation. Thank you.
So, I mean, an alternative to what we initially are proposing based on the feedback, which is maybe everything in the city limit should be suburban neighborhood high. We could make adjustments to the upper bound of suburban neighborhood medium and high as well, if we felt that this is too broad an approach. Or we'd be willing to hear other ideas if folks have them, and maybe this is or maybe even there's a group of this committee that would want to kind of start a small working group on it with us. This feels important though, because it, Tiffany said in there, it really affects our ability to get middle housing. It really affects our ability to get projects done. When we did the scenario planning, business as usual, letting all of these properties develop with their existing entitlements was the worst scenario. The worst performing future is where all of these property owners come to the conclusion that they're better off developing with their existing entitlements. And so that's a tough spot for staff too, because we hear the desire for density and we recognize that there's some infrastructure bottlenecks to achieving that. And that's a conversation that is very money dependent, right? Right now we're seeing some infrastructure money being pulled back in some cases. So it can vary how well we can address those over time and what resources we have to address some of those bigger ones, like new overpasses or where Lone Tree is going to have a future interchange with I-40. Those are big things, and they can hold up development if we are tying everything to them.
I just don't, I don't want to kick the can down the road, but I don't feel like I know enough to give you an answer.
It's real sticky.
I mean, we're literally talking, so, like, I mean, in the other option, right, you talked about raising the upper limits. I don't think the upper limits are the issue. I think that's the lower limits, right? Mm-hmm. So we don't want a lower limit that's too high, because then just say, screw it, and we just stick with our you know, I also don't, I mean, no offense to Little America, I don't want them to have the option to put it on, low density resort. Like, that's not what our community needs. our community needs housing. So, but what, picking an actual number, like, is it 3, 2, is it 4? Like, that's not something I'm in a position to do right now.
I moved it from 10 to 7 because 7 is generally considered transit accessible. Like that, there's enough density to support transit.
That's the lower. So, and that's for high or mediums?
For the high. Medium is basically a low density neighborhood.
It's just a normal standard.
Yeah, a normal
subdivision.
yeah.
Low densities or medium density is 2. As a low. Seems like we have to go somewhere between 2 and 7.
Yeah.
Too high, 2 might be a little.
Yeah, so what are we gonna do? Just like split the baby? I don't.
What do planners think?
Michelle or Tiffany, would you want to weigh in? You guys have been working on the code diagnostic, and one of the areas I know we're struggling with a little. At least we've been grappling with, not really struggling.
I mean, Michelle, if you want to go, I just, there's a level of creativity. There's definitely a market demand for single family homes, and single family homes are on the higher spectrum of the units that are selling. And, missing middle, you have to find that ownership for it. But it can and it does work really well in single family neighborhoods. I've heard that concern about big buildings with, smaller homes and people may not wanting that. But I mean, missing middle really is that housing type that could really start to diversify our neighborhoods, make communities and new neighborhoods more robust. So, I mean, I think the hope is with all of this, at the end of the day, we can convince some folks as they go into these sites that those are true housing types that may work within those new neighborhoods, and they can still reflect the desire and the look of the community they want to achieve. So, I mean, I live just down the street from a series of duplexes, and you'd never know that they're duplexes. And in fact, most people don't know. But so it can happen. So hopefully we can get there. That would be the goal. I mean, of course, the more density we can achieve in certain areas, the easier it will also be to serve those areas with transit.
You can give us a number, Tiffany.
Want it all. 1 billion. Oh, I'm just kidding. I don't necessarily have the number for you either. But maybe when you look at the map and look at broad swaths, maybe there's smaller components of those higher ends mixed with lower components, and that might strike the balance, especially for those property owners. And maybe those property owners are willing to come to the table that are most concerned because, we want to work with our partners. I definitely hear Michelle's concerns. Maybe there's a way to strike the balance to get that mixture.
Thank you, and Tiffany, well said. And I would just offer, I think I see that Tina Berger put in the chat that she's in on the working group. And Sarah, I think if there's time that it might be worth pulling a small group together and including some of the landowners that have various sites. We've heard from a few tonight that could probably provide some input, demonstrate some of the challenges to help that working group understand how we get to these numbers, and it might be a very useful sorry, it's so late. It might be a useful activity to do if there's time. So I think that's a great suggestion. I don't think any of us have the brain power at 8:30 tonight to come up with that number.
Yeah, let's kick the can down the road.
Yeah, and to say like by a working group, I mean, we need to meet in the next 2 weeks. So
I'm in on it.
So Julie and.
Yeah, I've spent the last 8 years staring at the JWP corridor. So, yes.
Is there anyone else? Yeah. Is there anyone else online?
I've invited
Scott would like.
Scott Roberts.
Clint? It's done.
Oh, I can ask.
They're going through it right now, right? So I know the exact numbers.
Anyone else on the getting together in 2 weeks? I'm gonna start sending you dates at 2 weeks from now. So, yeah, and of course, planners will invite ourselves.
And Tiffany and Michelle and all that.
Excellent. All right. Well, I know that was I'm sorry that was so late in the agenda. I felt like we needed to build up to it. But it is complicated and, yeah, and density is as easy as I say it is to calculate in a sentence. It's hard to understand how it works across. So thank you for spending a little extra time on it. The next item is talking about commercial areas in the plan. We had lots and lots of comments of commercial and whether we were supporting enough of it or too much of it or where it should go and the whole idea of corridors and what they should look like. You know, we have talked about a few things with this. One, I think that we are getting closer to having our existing and future road network finalized. And one of my solutions on corridors is to just flip the network illustration over the future growth illustration and say, if you create a parcel with frontage on one of these roads, it can be considered a corridor. You can basically do it administratively and put that in as a potential administrative change. I don't want to put those kinds of parcels through a plan amendment, a minor plan amendment process. I'd rather just say this can be considered compatible. Much like we were doing with the neighborhood community commercial. Also at.
Don't want it to have a minor plan amendment?
Yeah, so the proposal would be we'd put the dashed line on the map and say, here's the collectors and arterials of the city. And if you are developing a parcel and you want to put a portion of that parcel forward as a corridor use so that it can be kind of a denser commercial center for your area, that can just be allowed.
Doesn't that say though it is with a plan amendment?
No, that doesn't say a plan amendment for that.
It doesn't.
Oh, maybe it does say with a plan amendment concurrent with the, oh yes, it says with a minor plan amendment concurrent with the zoning amendment. Sorry, it's tired for me too now. And so that would be a pretty easy process overall, just to clarify corridors. There are definitely comments from people who just think we don't need corridors at all. But I think there are still automotive oriented commercial uses that exist in the city. We're not going to erase them or not have any areas that serve them. We're a Route 66 town. That would be a really weird direction to go, given our historic nature and the nature of some of our historic areas within the city. And then also we'd like to add some text to the neighborhood commercial page, which is 4-16. That allows any parcel in a suburban or urban neighborhood to be rezoned to zoning categories that allowed low to moderate intensity commercial uses of 45 feet or less in height without a plan amendment. So that would mean that would add neighborhood community commercial, which is our zone, and any zones that the county want to add to the table that could allow for someone to do that. There's only a few suburban neighborhoods in the county, but it would affect both jurisdictions. Could you pull up 4-16? We can look at that one.
This is the whole plan right here.
What?
On the table.
No, she's scrolling up.
Do you want to look at?
4-16.
Oh, sorry.
Totally on there. See how late it's getting?
Yeah.
We can't navigate the document. We're working on it though. So those are the changes for The neighborhood community commercial is listed as a commercial district, but it's not mapped anywhere, which is why I think it was confusing. We might also move it so that it's in the neighborhood section. Scroll down, please. But we'd basically allow this like limited height commercial in a suburban neighborhood or an urban neighborhood, let people come through and rezone commercial parcels. One, it could become somewhat of an issue, but most of these parcels would still have to rezone.
It's
Right.
still gonna be here.
Right. And there's plenty of neighborhoods in Flagstaff where the neighborhood looks like a single family neighborhood, but it's all zoned commercial. And so it's already allowed in a lot of places. So you'd still have a rezoning case with this. It would just be a smaller change. So
45 feet is the allowable height now.
that's the allowable height in the neighborhood community commercial, and the suburban the suburban commercial is 35 feet in height. So
So depending on the
Yeah. That was always one of those things it just felt like too tight of a gradation between those two zones anyway. To be honest, so I'm fine with that.
but if you wanted to be in community commercial or commercial services or highway commercial in the city, those all have a much higher building height.
That's why it says 45 feet or less in height.
An example of a 45-foot mixed-use building in town is at the corner of Benton and San Francisco. There's the Val's on the first floor, and then that building is almost exactly 45 feet.
It's 4 stories? 3.
More, I think.
Across the street is probably close to that because of the peak.
Yeah, the climbing gym is pretty close to the same
No, I'm
height.
saying across the street here,
Oh.
because of the slope.
Yeah, because they have slope. Yep.
All right, is everyone good with this one?
Another piece of the commercial, if everyone's okay with that, I don't see any comments, I don't see any hands. Okay, no. You had a bunch of comments on corridors, that they were too auto dependent, not conducive to walkability. And then also there were proposals that we should delete and combine the suburban and urban category. I guess this is one where there's definitely strong comments about this. The planners disagree with those comments. We see a lot of differences between suburban and urban corridors that could be significant. And I point them out here that urban corridors are still encouraging vertical mixed use and two-story commercial buildings, while suburban corridors encourage horizontal mixed use with commercial buildings in front and residential behind. Those are completely different development patterns. If we wanted to combine them, we would allow all those development patterns everywhere that we identify as a corridor. And that's not consistent with what we've been talking about since we adopted our current plan. I'm not sure why that doesn't stand out to people, but maybe we need to do some more illustrating to get that to be clearer. Urban, the other difference is we would consider urban corridors very high density and suburban corridors more medium density, which is why they have different, 20 units plus versus 29 units plus. We could make those more distinctive if we wanted to lower the density on suburban neighborhoods. But again, that only applies when the proposal is mixed use or an apartment. It doesn't apply if you're just doing a commercial property. You're building a Home Depot on a suburban corridor. There's no density requirement for that. And then lastly, urban corridors, as we've written them, require impacts from automotive-oriented uses such as drive-throughs to be minimized. We have small drive-throughs in downtown. There's coffee kiosks, there's bank ATMs. It is not that our urban areas are completely free of drive-throughs. And most urban areas are not completely free of drive-throughs. They have some small ones that have very limited, they do design work to limit their impact. And there's not a limitation for drive-throughs and these kinds of automotive-oriented uses like repair shops and oil change places in the suburban corridors. We do need a place for those highly accessible automotive uses, car washes, things like that. In the current plan, we have said no to car washes in areas we call urban and yes in suburban. That's an example of something that's been, when we say an automotive oriented use, you wouldn't want car washes to be in the middle of neighborhoods. You want them on a corridor. You want them where cars can access them easily. So mostly I felt like a lot of these comments were about carbon neutrality in some ways, and that people said we shouldn't be accommodating
Vehicles, period.
vehicles, in these locations. The planning staff sees differences between these categories. We don't see a benefit to combining them because they're distinctive enough. We would make some calls based on how it's written differently. And maybe they're minor, but I think they do make a difference. So our recommendation is that these comments are responded to with an explanation of why, but that we don't make changes to address them. So this is sort of, there's some very strong opinions in here. So we'll write detailed responses, but this is our proposal is basically not to go further than that with these. But tell us we're wrong. This is the time.
Defer to your recommendation. 8 minutes.
I agree with you.
Is there anything we could do to make them more walkable?
I mean, let's think about Route 66. How do we make Route 66 more walkable? How do we make, we would like wider sidewalks. We would like parkways. That's already in our engineering standards. We try and minimize driveway widths, and we don't always control those, but we do. We think we don't let people wrap driveways around the front of the building in a way that makes the building inaccessible. All that's kind of in our code now.
Which doesn't make that much difference when you got 30,000 cars a day.
Right. Volume impacts comfort for sure. And these are all on arterials, right? They're on big roads. I don't think if you pull up the map, you're not going to see, that's why Little America asked to be not suburban center, but suburban corridor. And that makes a lot of sense because volume on Butler is very high. A center would have to really be set back off the road and kind of oriented towards a different area. So these orange areas are the corridors. The one that came back as a comment that maybe we'd remove is this one through Country Club. But if we add the roads on and we say, if you're on one of these roads, you can do this as a minor amendment to become a corridor, then I think that will help clarify that you could. This is Continental as a corridor, and if there was a desire to create some bigger commercial use in there to serve the neighborhood, that could be done. They have an HOA, they have other restrictions, but that's the kind of thing that we could take some of the orange off the map here, but still get there.
I heard a lot of people saying they were fine with your recommendation.
Are folks on our committee members online okay with those recommendations? Tina and Kim, Walter, step out, Dirk. Okay, that's it on the commercial. Let's on the next one. I think it's no, Lauren. Take it away, Lauren.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I am the door monitor and also the senior planner in comprehensive planning. And now we are on to community character in the plan. And so this section, we got 66 comments about community character, things related to community character. So a lot of them were specifically asking for more references to community character in the plan. And a few of those were asking to change the terminology from community character to community identity. And then the others were, focused on aesthetic, architectural design type language, and then also specifically talking about adding stronger language about protecting historic resources and heritage preservation in the plan. And we're talking about design and the architectural elements. A lot of that was specifically talking about the larger new developments and how to couple that with density. And there were a few in there that specifically talked about view sheds and protecting view sheds. And a good frame of reference for all of this is a lot of these were specifically on some of the graphics you were just looking at. So, when you're with somebody recently told Elsa that I looked like an IKEA, a blue IKEA, and that they were commenting on that. And so of those 66 comments, so that I was just told that. I was like, well, all right. If you look at that and all you can see is the blue IKEA, then I can see where your comment came from. And so about 60% of these comments, weren't particularly actionable. Some of them were just in support of things we were saying, and some of them, were in direct conflict with things that we can't act on, like specific laws and regulations that we just wouldn't be able to do, or something that the regional plan itself, can't address at this level. And so examples of that were a lot of the comments were about limiting heights of development. And specifically a lot of especially on the images, a lot of the photo or the comments said, wanting a straight 2-story height limit in more areas of Flagstaff. And then there were also a few comments that specifically asked to prevent demolition of historic properties. And that is just something that even if we wanted to, we don't have the power to outright prevent demolition. And we have, roadblocks in place to try and preserve historic buildings, but that's just something we don't have the power to do. So some of the things that we've talked about to address these comments. First, and one idea, a big idea we'd like to run by you is using the term placemaking, inserting that into the plan and using that over the terms community character or community identity. And part of that is to, get at not just locking everything in exactly as it is now and preserving Flagstaff, without growth, and how we can all work together to do placemaking more dynamic, a path forward, how we're going to use the regional plan to achieve this. And so more active role in that. And I think based on the comments, it also kind of incorporates more differing ideas between character and identity and where we're going. So that's an overall thing we would like your feedback on putting in the plan. And then we also had some suggestions for strengthening existing goals and policies and adding new ones. And as I'm sure you saw when you looked at the memo, a lot of these things were already in the plan. And so it would be strengthening the language to reflect the comments and make them, stand out a little bit better for placemaking or community character. So some of these talked about, there's language in the plan about community gateways and kind of separating that out from where it is now to also include talking about like how to use gateways and design to express community character as you're entering town. And then, repeating patterns and design elements and materials of our historic districts for new development in those historic districts or adjacent to them. And also going back to the blue IKEA building, encouraging pedestrian oriented design at street level, some of the things, walkability things folks were just talking about, and also encouraging design that would break up those building footprints and their bulk and mass. And I think, and that's one spot it seemed, it for some folks, if you're looking at that big block, you're picturing either a giant modern glass building or some brutalist concrete architecture that's going to take up the whole thing. And that is one thing that folks are reacting negatively to. And so, adding goals policies that would encourage, breaking that up in a different design. And also, that's okay. And then the last one on here, and this is our, is a tool that already exists in our code. But it is a good tool and really gets to the heart of what most of these comments were asking for, is just encouraging development of additional historic overlay zones and creation of design guidelines for additional historic districts. And again, that's a tool that exists, but we only have 2.5, counting the floating overlay zone, of these zones that have the design guidelines and standards. And so that's a tool that would really work for a lot of what folks are asking for, but just encouraging.
How does one of those, how does that happen? Creation of a new historic overlay zone. Like what would make that happen? The community coming and saying they want something.
Yeah. Essentially, yes. Yeah. So for example, we're talking with a section of the Southside Historic District neighborhood who wants one, and to develop design guidelines and what it would look like. And then 51% of property owners in the area would need to sign on. And it would go to the Heritage Preservation Commission and City Council.
I need zoning too. Gotta go through commissions and council. And then it's added to the zoning code. Not a very easy process, but it gets the results I think people want. So it's good to put in, and it exists. It exists as a process for the city. The county doesn't have a process for doing that yet, but their commitment in the plan is to become a certified local government, which would encourage them to develop such a process.
An ordinance, yeah.
An ordinance that would do this. But yeah, property owner willingness is a big issue with historic overlay zones because it's just necessary.
I like the term. I was excited to see that term.
Placemaking?
Yeah, because I read a lot about it and I hadn't thought of it in terms of a replacement for community character, but when you look at what's happening in placemaking, it makes sense.
You can have new places, right, that have their own character.
Right.
The other part the part that bothers me about community character is always like, well, whose character? Your character? My character? Like, who's decided that this is the character? Like, so I think this has been I think this is a well executed and nuanced way of dealing with this issue.
You can include some kind of a description of what you mean by placemaking.
There's a current definition in the plan, but we could include it in the text or make it a little more robust, I think.
Yeah. Like a pop-out little
yeah.
boxes.
Placemaking is a word that is used with impunity in the current plan, but described very little. We're just supposed to know what it is. So we'd rather have a narrow set of policies and a good definition, and then we might get more placemaking done. Not that we've gotten zero done, but it's been not the easiest thing to ask for.
I actually had a problem with changing the word community character, because to me, placemaking could be anywhere. It could be Phoenix, Glendale, and Flagstaff is a very special place, and it has a character. And I mean, at least I know what that is. I lived here for 45 years and 50 years. I don't know, long time. Anyway, so I just personally had a problem with changing that. I mean, maybe I'd be okay with placemaking if the description was really clear to people, you know? But, because placemaking doesn't, is just to me a generic term. Or community character is big.
And I just want to tag on to that because in our current draft of our comprehensive plan, we have a chapter currently entitled Diverse Cultures, Community Character. So it's a very different approach, I think, but the county has for adopted area plans, design review overlay zone. So that's where we dive into specifics. It's not specific to historic districts, but for communities that have an area plan like Belmont, for instance, has a design review overlay zone. So it does get real specific about design guidelines for those individual communities. So we, on that community, and I'm not gonna, we don't need to get into comprehensive plan, but just to kind of highlight that there is going to be a difference there. You'll see the difference in the two plans.
I think one of the struggles we've had with community character is that we wanted to continue to take the approach of we'll know it when we see it, as opposed to actually defining it. Tempe's general plan has 12 pages and 16 character districts for the city of Tempe, and each one has their own design guidelines. That was proposed in Flagstaff in 2002 and shot down like terribly, like no one was interested in it. And that is really how you get community character preserved, is you build districts, you go through that process. It is a big process and it's difficult because we will, no matter what we do, adding that kind of additional zoning scrutiny will get challenged. And it'll just be Swiss cheese wall to wall at this point, where Tempe and other places have had those in place and just been refining them slowly over time. So we're not in a great position to do the big community character things. And that doesn't mean we abandon it, but if we're not going to do it at that district level approach, which boy, we talked about early in the process, like we had a robust planner debate on, do we propose a district level approach to community character? And is that the solution? Because if we keep taking this, you'll know community character when you see it, or you've got to be Susie to know what it is, we will continue to struggle with how to achieve it. And it will be done in a way that's very haphazard. I think what I like about placemaking is that it says you have to have, the things about placemaking is you have to have intention. You have to have an attention to detail at the pedestrian scale, which is really critical. And it does encourage you to look for historic elements. But if you're in an area of town where it's a greenfield development, and there's no surrounding historic districts, it feels like downtown Tombstone to, make everyone have a, like in Tombstone, everybody has a fake Western front on the front of their building, and it's a Disneyland. There's a 3/4 second scale second story. We just went over this with
It's a
this.
caricature.
Yeah, it's a caricature instead of character. Placemaking says don't make it a caricature, make it something with unique characteristics and functional place. And that's what the planners like about it, because it says more, and we never get a caricature. But some things we get do feel like a caricature instead of character, and I think that's what people complain about. And so it's hard to know how to do that. But if you keep saying and you see it, we'll keep getting more of it. So that's the hard part of this, is like, how do we define this? But also, if we're too specific, it reads like code, or it can be really restrictive on the creativity of people who are trying to arrive at that place with us. There's good examples in town and there's bad examples, right? I mean,
Yeah. I think it's a hard term of use. Community character? No, placemaking. I know, but most people have not. Right, so I think that's gonna have to be. That's what's weird to me. I mean, I think of the scary thing that happened in Kansas City. I went to an old, beautiful museum, absolutely gorgeous, historic. And they did an addition to the museum, and it's a big silver bubble. And it's in a historic neighborhood, and it's just like, didn't, you know, it was just shocking. And disallow brutalist architecture. Now that I know what brutalist is. You know, so I mean, I guess that's what is scary to me is that at least somewhere you drive into town and you're going to get a feel. It doesn't need to be defined. It's just a feeling, you know, of what this place feels like, you know. And so I don't know, that's why I like it. So I'll shut up.
Tina, did you want to add something? I saw you put a few things in the chat.
Um, I guess it's Flagstaff is so unique in nature, and I've traveled the country, and I think that for the most part, the community wants to see where they're coming into, other than welcome to Flagstaff at 6,991 feet. I think they're more endowed with that than they are with maybe actually saying these words that are very hard to define. Placemaking, I guess, in the bigger cities where I've done a lot of work makes a lot of sense. I'm just trying to think maybe we could somehow stretch placemaking. I don't know how you would do that to make everybody happy, but I'm with you on the character idea. But I think the biggest thing people are looking for, if you come into Flagstaff, there's not a train welcoming you. There's nothing. It's just a sign that says, welcome to Flagstaff. So I think that's what people are really wanting. It's just a way to come in and really feel that they're in the mountains and the surrounding beauty and all the different communities that we have. I don't know how you even do that, honestly.
Another term that sometimes gets used is that's a little different than character is talking about creating a sense of place.
So, right. That's where I'm going, sense of place, but thank you. That's kind of where I was trying to go.
Yeah, I picked up what you're putting down. So saying creation of a sense of place is very different to me than community character, because community character says that you'll know it when you see it, where sense of place says you create arrival, you create feeling, you break things up so the pedestrian has the vibrancy. I mean, vibrancy was thrown around a lot in these comments. And beauty, whereas was brought up a lot. And it's hard to define some of those things, right? I actually think a silver bubble in the middle of a historic district would be beautiful. And I would never feel bad if I was shocked in an art district, because that's my personal approach to art and beauty. But your approach to art and beauty might be very different.
That's true. So that's a hard one. It's almost an impasse. So probably just get as much input on that as we can, just in short term.
So maybe we don't want to resolve this particular one right this second, because Lauren's taken a great first jab at it. But we do need to wrap it up pretty quickly to have our proposal. So maybe if you have other thoughts on this in the next week, please email those to us. And we'll not have that as a consensus thing, but we'll take that additional input now that you kind of know how we're trying to absorb all of this. And I'll write the responses again. Like, there's definitely people who are like, how do we get more of these ponderosa pine easements? I have no idea why they think we have easements for ponderosa pines, but we don't. So I'll work on some of the responses, but if you've got ideas on things to add to this, I think that would be really helpful, of like, what are those key things? But like I said, if we go too far down the detail train, we're restricting the ability to write good code. We're maybe restricting creativity where we would want to see it. So there's a lot of push and pull to it.
Maybe a definition that fits Flagstaff placemaking, not one that could be used in Chicago.
Sure.
Just here. I'm just thinking of another way to think.
Cool. We are getting quite over time, so is everyone all right with that? Plan for next steps, and we will move on to the next item unless I hear any complaints, which is about the vision statement.
This is the last item. If you remember, we first drafted the vision statement back, it was maybe the third meeting that we had, and most of the plan was not yet written at that point. We had the vision statement coming from the visioning workshops. A lot of those phrases came from those workshops and people's responses there. And we were kind of putting them together. Some comments we had on the vision statements were we said the phrase preserving our unique character, which, as we've just been talking about, some people had reactions to that. And then some people pointed out that it was sort of backwards. We were talking first about preserving and then second about what we're trying to foster. And maybe we need to reverse that and put the focus on what we're trying to foster. And then also to connect the vision statements closer to the priorities. So we have the original vision statement here, and there are 4 alternatives that we came up with that use slightly different language while still trying to keep some of those phrases. Reversing the order, and it doesn't have to turn into one of these 4. It could stay as is. It could be something else entirely, but at the end of the night. So
I had very, very weak feelings about this to start with, and
They're even weaker.
they're dead on the floor. Does anyone have strong feelings on this?
Got a draft.
Michelle has strong feelings. Good. Someone had strong.
I like parts of each one, and so I kind of tried to, I think 4 came closest for me, but I wanted to modify it a little bit to say,
You want to put up your text?
how would I do that?
Are you on the meeting?
No, I'm not. Okay. So I was thinking for 4 to add the word vibrant there, the very beginning, the first sentence, because I kind of like that. And then, as we prepare for an uncertain future influenced by climate change and population change, we aim to, and I was thinking, take out the word balance. We aim to, or we commit to embracing our rich history and safeguarding our precious natural resources, which comes from the last part of number 3. Kind of a rewrite combination thing. Very minor changes, but
I can attempt to write that up on the screen if you.
sure.
Do you want to just email it, or
I can email it to you. How about that? That work?
Okay, sure.
It's just an idea. It's another option to throw out there. But that's the way I looked at it, is trying to figure out the phrases that I like the most in each of them. I mean, I like the opportunity to live and thrive as well, but I couldn't figure out how to put that into 4.
Too long.
So, right, it makes it kind of long.
So it's just kind of vague anyway, right? So.
But I think these are great drafts.
so make another stab at a modified number 4?
All right with that?
Yeah, I liked 2 and 3 are my favorites. One thing I didn't think we needed to mention in here was housing and economic opportunity for all. That just seems too specific. To me, a vision should be more general.
I think there were definitely some people who felt that the vision needed to tie to the priorities, and that's kind of what we did with number 4. Is there are people who said this vision could mean anything, but then also some people just really wanted a lot out of a vision statement when they're very, very general and
I like the original one too.
Yeah, I like the original one. So.
Is it that we should go back to the original one and make some tweaks to it?
Where's the original one?
I'll pull it up. We could take out.
You got 8 comments. 8 comments out of 2,000.
Yeah.
Best to change.
They were very emphatic. I hate to tell you. Like, I know not many people are having strong feelings at this at 9:15, but like they basically told us it sucked. like people had strong negative reactions to it. It was not a tempered set of 8 comments. We were like, wow.
Well, that makes
People
me
have feelings about this.
even less inclined.
Me too.
So I mean, that's fair. They just said this doesn't open up anything for me on the first page. Like that's kind of how I looked at it. Is it didn't.
If I open one of these plans, I don't even read the first.
That's because you know where the good stuff is. It's not on the first page.
Not the cover commenter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't even read the plan, but favorite comment. So yeah, so I heard maybe go back to 1 with bring in some of the 4 and 2 and 3 stuff to number 1 and reimagining it, or maybe go to 4 and
I think
The original.
no, not number 1, the exact thing, yeah. So modify the original.
like
No.
I mean, I wouldn't, that's,
Stick with the original.
fine sticking with the original.
So my response is basically haters gonna hate. Okay.
That's correct. Eight comments is not worth the time. Keep the original.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay, we got in. We were public participation, but we've done that already. So we have a summary discussion and any miscellaneous to and from. Is there anything you need to tell us about?
No, thank you all for coming. I will follow up with emails on some of these things next day or 2, and then we will send you all a notice so you know when the retreat is happening too, and you are very welcome to come to some or all of it.
Will there be a draft plan out with the retreat or?
We will send a draft plan out with the retreat packet, yes. 90%.
That's great.
Yeah, so still changes afterwards. But thank you all so much for coming back together. I know shaking off the dust after 5 or 6 months isn't the easiest thing to do, so we appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for all your hard work.
yeah.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you after 6 months.
Thanks, everybody.
have a great night. Thank you, staff.